while I read you a story. It is a beautiful day out, so we decided to be out here. I hope you'll enjoy. My story today is about Olaf and the dragon. It's written by Antonato Leotelli. That sounds like an Italian name. One of the more colorful legends in Nord folklore is the tale of Olaf One-Eye and Numinex. Numinex is the dragon. Long ago in the First Age, a fearsome dragon named Numinex ravaged the whole of Skyrim. The dreadful drake wiped out entire villages, burned cities, and killed countless Nords. It seemed that no power in Tamriel could stop the monster. This was a troubled time in Skyrim's history, for a bitter war of succession raged between the hordes. The Jarls might have been able to conquer the beast if they had worked together, but trust was in desperately short supply. A skillful warrior named Olaf came forward and promised to defeat the beast. I almost said something else. In some accounts, he is the Jarl of Whiterun. In other versions of the legend, Olaf promises the people of Whiterun that he will capture the monster if they will name him the Jarl. At any rate, Olaf ventures forth with a handful of his most trusted warriors and seeks the beast out.
Do you guys remember in 2009 where Sony announced The Last Guardian and then there was tons of delay?
Mount Anthem. Needless to say, it's an epic battle. First, Olaf comes at the dragon with his axe and his shield. Some variants of the legend say that Olaf and the beast battled.
Do you guys remember in 2009 where Sony announced?
But were too evenly matched for either to gain an advantage. Most accounts hold that Olaf, perhaps frustrated that his weapons are completely ineffectual against the dragon, finally casts them aside. Giving voice to the rage that has been building within him, Olaf unleashes a terrible shout. Here again, the stories diverge. Many accounts hold that Olaf did not realize he possessed the power of dragon speech, while others suggest that he had long possessed this gift, but wished to test himself against the dragon in martial combat first. Virtually all variations of the legend, however, agree on what happened next. Using the awesome powers of the dragon language, Numinex and Olaf engaged in an epic shouting duel atop Mount Anthem. Can you just picture this warrior and this dragon using these dragon shouts back and forth on each other? So forceful are their words, they are said to shatter the stone and split the sky. Finally, it is one.
Announced The Last Guardian, and then there was tons of delays, and then not talking about it and avoiding it, then re-revealing it, and it finally coming out 7 years later. Well, there's a lot of games still like that, yet they haven't come out yet, and so we're going to be looking at those games. Now, before we get to our first game, it's worth defining what we're going to actually be taking a look at here, which is mostly vaporware games. Vaporware being a title that's been announced, but never technically officially canceled. And I will admit, there are some games in here that have been canceled, but I say that because we're trying to look at games that still have a chance of coming out despite what the developer or publisher may have said. So, admittedly, there are hundreds of games that have the same story as The Last Guardian that just straight up do get canceled, never come out, the developer closes, this, that, and the other. And that's very true. You know, we're going to try to avoid titles that have a pretty good amount of certainty that they will never come out and focus instead on games that, you know, in one way or another, I think do have a plausible chance of actually coming out. And so here are all the games that we are still waiting for on PlayStation 3 and PlayStation 4. And we will start with Kingdom Under Fire 2. This game was announced January 2008, and it's an MMO, an RTS, and an RPG meshed into one. And over the years, this game has suffered multiple delays and has changed dramatically. But developer Blueside has made a decent effort in being transparent about the project and what's going on with it. And being a very PC-centric game, it was, in fact, slated to come to PS3 and Xbox 360, which ultimately never happened. Then, the same month the PS4 launched, the developer announced a PS4 version was on the way. But the game has done private testing and an open beta for Asian territories that later closed. Then the game launched in Russia, which closed in 2019, which brings us to our most recent update, being that the game finally found a publisher for Western territories, coming to PC at some time later in 2019, which is seeming increasingly unlikely given that we don't have much of 2019. But that previously announced PS4 version, still nothing. Now, let's get to a title that I think some people do remember, and it takes us back to November 2013 when the
because there's a lot of people that are saying that you and your wife are gaming the system.
Early game show where the footage isn't gameplay at all, and yet we were told that it is. Either way, this game is a cooperative free-to-play dungeon crawler from Capcom, and it was poised to be using this new game engine, Pantaray, which was designed for the 8th generation of game consoles. Now, actual gameplay was revealed at TGS 2013, the same year, giving us a realistic glimpse of what has been made so far. And the title was supposed to be released in 2014, but that didn't happen. By 2015, it was noted that the game's original vision expanded, and thus the release was pushed back. The last major update was June 2018, where Capcom extended the trademark, and that's not a guarantee the game's still coming, but holding the trademark is always a good indicator that some form of interest is there, and given the extensive investment of a new engine, and the footage already looking pretty significant, I would say there's still hope for this one, and this game was never canceled. This it still had the trademark going, so there's always hope there. But next up, we're going to be talking about Wild, which was announced during Gamescom 2014 as a second-party exclusive for PS4, being published by Sony and directed by the creator of Rayman, Michel Ancel. You play as a tribe member in this Neolithic period, where you have godlike abilities to communicate with and even summon animals. We got a pretty extensive look at the gameplay during Sony's 2015 Paris Games Week press conference, and many gamers were very impressed with what they saw. However, we haven't had much news regarding the title since. Occasionally, Michelle will reiterate the game is still in development, but these updates are far and few between, and Sony did file a new trademark for the game, though. That was very recently, March 2019. And based on the nature of Sony's involvement and the footage that was previously shown, there's likely a substantial investment here, which leads me to believe this game will indeed come, but is facing a lengthy amount of trouble. Sony's been on record of supporting the creative direction of games in recent years and understanding the need of a longer development time. Like, if the game needs it, Sony's going to allow that. So I think realistically this one would be a platform shift, which would be PlayStation 5, and would also include a re-reveal, just like The Last Guardian. Now, while we're talking about the game director, Michel, that's a good segue into our next game, Beyond Good and Evil 2. This is another project of his, a game which early on, never really got a proper announcement, in all fairness. It started with a teaser trailer in 2008, and that was very brief. And then another trailer, which was leaked and not officially released by Ubisoft, that appeared in 2009. There were plenty of rumors and even confirmation of the game's development throughout the years, but aside from that, nothing meaningful. So by 2016, which brings us to a 7-year drought, more or less, of news with that game, Ubisoft was forward in saying that the game's director, Michel Ancel, was working on both Beyond Good and Evil 2 and Wild, kind of implying that his time was split between both projects. But a year later, during Ubisoft's E3 press conference, the game was finally re-revealed, now being directed as a prequel rather than a sequel. Since then, nothing major has been reported other than Ubisoft CEO Yves Guillemot being pretty optimistic about the universe and its potential. Ironically, no platforms were ever specifically named, though you'd imagine back in 2008, 7th generation consoles were expected, and now we're expecting 8th gen. But perhaps how slow development has been, maybe they're eyeing up the 9th. Another title that appears to be in limbo and may not actually come out now, even though it seemed like it was going to, is Tekken Cross Street Fighter, originally announced during the 2010 San Diego Comic-Con alongside Street Fighter Cross Tekken, and that actually did come out in 2012 on multiple platforms. So where exactly is the Tekken design crossover? Well, over the years, the development was reconfirmed a number of times until 2016, where the series director, Katsuhiro Harada, stated the game's development was officially on hold. In 2018, he confirmed this again, but also revealed that the game was about 30% complete. The latest news is that Harada still wants to pursue finishing the game, but he's not sure it's a wise idea considering Tekken 7 is doing so well on its own. He also previously mentioned years ago he was concerned about splitting the player base between Tekken 7 and Street Fighter 5 with another game. In situations like this, the code, assets, everything's still there, just not actively being worked on. But the longer the game goes on without getting development attention, it could end up costing a lot more just to start it up again, assuming you even try to move it to new hardware, which would be a likely scenario at this point. The next game here that I think had a lot of potential, actually, is Hell Raid, developed by Techland, the same team behind Dying Light and Dead Island. The game was revealed in 2013 and is a first-person mix of Dead Island and Elder Scrolls, which would be based on randomly generated content. Now, originally, it was announced for PS3, 360, and PC as a downloadable title, but later this was moved to PS4 and Xbox One. In 2014, the game was delayed, and then in 2015, it was announced as being officially on hold due to it not meeting the developers' expectations and them wanting to flesh out Dying Light more. The concept and footage looks promising, and since it hasn't been on the back burner for too long, I'd say there's still actually a good chance you might see this again. I would hope so. Now let's get into some lesser-known titles, or maybe totally forgotten ones, and certainly some older ones, but this one is Identify. This was revealed at E3 2005 as a new iToy game for the upcoming PlayStation 3, which showcased 2 female spy agents being directed by a human player. As in, the camera would face you, and you would be inserted into the game and give commands to the AI, and then you'd watch the scenes play out. Back then, it wasn't even really fully understood if this was a full game or just another tech demo, but Sony's history has shown us that a lot of their tech demos actually go on to be developed into full games. So it's almost surprising to see this game wasn't a part of the PlayStation 9's first round of experimental releases on PSN. Sony still owns the IP, but I doubt we'll ever see something like Identify again. This seems like more wishful thinking than anything else, but this was publicly revealed at some point, and it's an IP that Sony has. Now, while we're talking about E3 2005, this is a great segue into 2 games, 8 Days and The Getaway 3. Yes. Both of these games were more or less just tech demos in 2005, but behind the scenes, both of these were being developed by Sony's London studio. And this was around the time that Team Soho was already absorbed into SE London, so the developer was doing multiple projects from all the staff that was now a part of the team. 8 Days was a new IP, being a third-person shooter. The story was taking place over the course of 8 days, set in 8 different states, and you'd play as 2 different characters separately, and at a certain point in the story, their paths would cross. And The Getaway 3 would be the sequel to the already established open-world action franchise that Sony released on the PlayStation 2. Both of these games were slated for the PS3 and used to demonstrate the PS3's power. That's why they were used as tech demos early on in 2005. Though at the time, both of these trailers were under heavy scrutiny as they were being labeled as gameplay, and yet they weren't because they were more in line with pre-rendered footage. Basically, both these games were confirmed to be canceled by Sony in 2008. This was right when Phil Harrison left the company and Shuhei Yoshida took over Sony's worldwide studios. And this was so the developer could focus on bigger franchises like SingStar and opportunity projects like iPad, of all things. But at the time, remember, this was seen as an opportunity for the idea of iPad, even though it ended up bombing. Shuhei Yoshida also noted that the company was trying to focus on multiplayer efforts, and due to lack of an online mode for 8 days, that's another reason why it was canned. However, in 2009, London Studios' Nicolas Doucet mentions in a GameSpot interview that the games aren't canceled, but rather they were put on hold, and that they were around halfway done, actually. Also, in a 2011 Eurogamer interview with a former London studio employee, Richard Bunn, he said 8 Days needed about another year of development time to complete. Both games were actually much further along than most people seem to realize, and yet going through with them still would have cost millions on top of what was already spent. Despite these games having been long labeled as canceled, it's hard to ignore the mention of them being on hold, the revelation of how far along they were, and the fact that Sony still holds the rights to these franchises. It's entirely plausible, though a stretch, that we could see these games return in some way, shape, or form. Now, returning back to lesser-known games, 2 Days to Vegas has been MIA for a very long time, and yet has never officially been canceled. Development began in 2003 for this action-adventure game where you travel across the U.S. to get to Vegas in order to help your younger brother. The game was slated to release on PS3 and Xbox 360, but hasn't had any meaningful updates since 2009, where IGN confirmed the game was still in development. Now, if you check the developer's website, the game is still under their list of projects next to all their other releases, which did actually come out, and they were like smaller iOS releases or a PS2 game here or there, but this is the only thing on there that hasn't been completed. And so it's not like the developer is defunct. Something is there at the studio, and for now, it just might not get revisited, or maybe it's just in development hell. Moving on to a game that had a very different scenario compared to everything else in this video is 6 Days in Fallujah, a third-person tactical shooter for PS3, 360, and PC that tells the story of the war in Iraq. It was supposed to follow a squad of U.S. Marines over a period of 6 days, taking place in November of 2004. The game was announced April 2009, with Konami being the publisher. And immediately the game was seen as highly controversial for covering such a sensitive topic that was still very fresh in people's minds. Weeks later, Konami decided to drop out of publishing the title. Developer Atomic Games continued to search for a publisher, but no one would agree to sign on. Studio president Peter Tamty assured everyone the game was still coming and was mostly complete. As time pressed on, the developer suffered layoffs and eventual closure in 2011. As recently as 2018, Tamty stated the game was still not canceled. All the assets and code is there and will eventually release. When and how is still a big TBD. The game is obviously aged and would certainly need to be ported to new hardware, but there's also plenty of self-publishing options that he could have pursued as well, so it's more complex to wonder why this game hasn't shipped. There may never be a good time to release this game given its circumstances, but waiting any longer probably isn't going to be doing it any favors. And finally, we get to the most mysterious title here, Agent. This was announced during Sony's 2009 E3 press conference as a PS3 Rockstar Games exclusive. This was a huge deal at the time, Rockstar being this big publisher with top-tier games under their belt, and Sony landing a major exclusive with them. But the history we know so far paints a much more complicated picture. The game started...
I thought of a comment.
Started as a proof of concept after Angel Studios was acquired by Rockstar in 2002. The team that eventually became Rockstar San Diego worked hard to create a vertical slice of the game to show their new parent company, all the while improving their engine to make it into a full-blown project. At a certain point, the team was told to start doing Western assets, which then led to Red Dead Redemption. This is where Rockstar started to spread a lot of their work across their multiple studios, so it's on record that Agent continued beyond San Diego, while Red Dead was being worked on too. Agent just never came to fruition, but instead had many of its assets used in Red Dead and even Grand Theft Auto, allegedly. Adding fuel to the fire, the trademark was constantly renewed over the years until 2018, where it was officially deemed abandoned by the Patent and Trademark Office. Despite Rockstar still having Agent listed on their main site, it seems like this is one title that has very little hope of ever actually coming back. So admittedly, this last one right here, I'm going to say this one's donezo. But that, everybody, are all the PS3 and PS4 games that we are still waiting for. And, well, to be fair, if any of these come out, they're not going to be on PlayStation 3, certainly. So that's kind of a misnomer. But the thing about all these games is that they actually have a much deeper history for some of them. So, admittedly, we can do separate videos on some of these games entirely, like Agent or like 8 Days and The Getaway. There's a lot more discussion to be had there, but of course we're covering multiple games, so that's why we had to move through these in a somewhat reasonable fashion. Development hell is real, and it's no fun for any studio to be faced with these kind of circumstances, whether to have to abandon a project, the publisher drops funding, tells them to move on, the publisher dies, this, that, and the other. There are a lot of games that end up being canceled, but it's a rare circumstance when it becomes vaporware, where it never really gets canceled, and it's just kind of in this weird purgatory of game development where it may or may not come out. A lot of the times, these IP, they still live on with the publisher or some rights owner that could potentially do something with them if they want to, even if their original developer isn't attached to the project anymore. That's why some of these games could still see the light of day. This is how Duke Nukem Forever still eventually came out. So it's a possibility for sure. But anyway, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you haven't yet, please subscribe for the best PlayStation news, reviews, and updates that are here on YouTube. And you can follow me on Twitter at Mystic Ryan, because over there I posted a link to a Japanese Resistance 2 ad that you should really watch. See, this is why you should follow me on Twitter, because I show you all the weird, quirky things in PlayStation history that you would have never known about. Although, to be fair, you probably shouldn't have known about for your own well-being. I'll see you all in my next video.
Olha essa parada aqui, senhora presidente. A democracia é a pior forma de governo. Sabe quem falou essa frase? Winston Churchill. Se ele fosse deputado, filho do presidente, os opositores parariam por aí e não seguiriam a ler a mensagem, que termina, com exceção de todas as demais. O que o Carlos Bolsonaro falou não tem nada demais. Esses daí que até ontem estavam mandando dinheiro para Cuba, babando ovo de Fidel Castro, enviando dinheiro para a Venezuela, amantes de ditaduras, são incapazes de repudiar o governo, a narcoditadura de Maduro, vem querer posar aqui diamante da democracia. Carlos Bolsonaro não falou nada demais. As coisas numa democracia demoram, porque exigem debate. Ele falou só isso. Não temos condições de mudar, né? Não temos condições de candidato, só um candidato que foi para o segundo turno é que...
destruidoras de mundos. Países, né?
Sony has been very quiet regarding the PlayStation 5. Most likely, they have a lot of things they want to spring on people that they hope come as a surprise. But the fact is, if you've been paying attention, there are already quite a few things you can know about this console that set it apart by more than just a generation. Possibly even some things that none of us have thought about. Hi folks, it's Falcon, and today on Game Ranks, let's talk about how Sony is planning something different for the PlayStation 5.
Well, let's just go ahead and say something. Sony is looking at everything differently. Sony CEO Kenichiro Yoshida, he had the following to say. If you look at the game industry as a whole, the console market is not a major market. Rather, it's a niche market, if you will. But for core gamers, immersive experiences are something we would like to value. In this respect, for the time being, the console as something that brings about computing functionality to the users is very important. But on the other hand, technology will progress, and so, as I said today, the Remote Play and PlayStation Now and other streaming services will be worked on in parallel, and that is what we are doing at this moment. Now, some of this might be a little bit alarming sounding on account. Console gaming is actually, at the moment, not necessarily a niche market. Is it as big as the PC gaming market at the moment? I mean, it depends on which developer you're talking about. It's a much more nuanced answer than yes or no, but console gaming at the moment is a high dollar item. Whether or not it's technically the niche, the fact that they're looking at it this way is very, very interesting. Now, before you go ahead and say, oh, they're abandoning the console market, there's another thing that Yoshida said as he was talking about this, which is that because it is a niche market, they want to aim primarily at what they're calling hardcore gamers. Now, what executives call hardcore gamers and what hardcore gamers call hardcore gamers are not necessarily the same thing. However, what they're indicating is they believe their core business is built around the specific interests of what they believe to be hardcore gamers. Now, this involves a lot of market research, and there's a good chance they've spoken to a lot of people who call themselves hardcore gamers, and what they really intend to do, niche or mainstream, big market or small, is cater to that profile they've generated that they're calling hardcore gamer. Now, Yoshida has also said that next-gen PlayStation hardware is a necessity or necessary. It's something they have to do. This was a while back, but it sits in pretty well with the idea that they're trying to serve a very specific market that maybe isn't ready to move over to the full streaming services of something like a Google Stadia or the xCloud offering that Microsoft is working on, or even PlayStation's streaming service that they're in the process of working on as well. And that they believe that it's going to be completely necessary to have the hardware locally for at least one more generation. Now, putting this in line with the niche comments that he's made more recently, it makes sense. They may be expecting a lot more people to be playing Assassin's Creed in their browser in maybe 5-10 years, but the people who move to that are probably not going to be the hardest of hardcore gamers, and I'm not saying that as an insult in any way, but somebody who plays games as like a primary hobby that they intend to get very good, or even in a lot of cases professionally, do not like streaming lag. You get latency no matter what. it's not possible to not have latency. But having
Street and Central Avenue
CBD ensures that you're not depending on any outside factors to predict that latency. You know exactly what you're getting.
Yeah, this is Way Street and Central
But
Avenue
with local
CBD.
hardware, you'll more or less be able to at least predict, get used to, and minimize input latency. That's not necessarily something you can do with a streaming service, as the internet, especially in the United States, is not that great. Comparatively speaking, other countries have internet way better than the United States, and the primary user base of the console will be in the United States. Now, these demographics are absolutely changing, as in China, streaming is becoming a much, much bigger gaming platform. However, we're just not there in the US. The infrastructure just isn't there. There are large swaths of the United States that are actually still on dial-up internet, and I think that there's going to be a very specific push towards those types of people. You don't necessarily have to live in a big city with great internet to play games well. With streaming services, you basically would be stuck with that situation because your input lag would probably be totally trash in a lot of rural areas. Now, understanding these things, I think we've got probably one of the more interesting things to bring up here. Sony Worldwide Studios chairman Sean Layden has said some of Sony's first-party multiplayer titles may not actually be PlayStation exclusive. But we also have to understand that, let's say we talk about Microsoft. They own Minecraft, and Minecraft is on every platform they can get it on because they know that's what Minecraft's business is. If they made Minecraft an Xbox exclusive, I think their base would just become extremely limited because the game itself is not the kind of game that people would buy a console for. Instead, it's kind of a more social game in a lot of respects, especially if you get a good server going. As Sony is looking into the idea of live services, I'm sure that they're probably thinking, well, if we do that, it's probably not a good idea to limit ourselves to our own console. Which, that said, what they run the risk of doing is turning the PlayStation brand, or indeed the other brands, Xbox and so on, into simple changes in experience that present us all of the same software. The Nintendo Switch, for instance, is something that provides something entirely unique, and that's why it's doing so well. If Sony doesn't present us unique things, if it's literally basically just a developer / publisher now, I mean, remember that deal that they unveiled with Microsoft in which they're actually going to be outsourcing a lot of their work as far as their streaming service over to Microsoft's xCloud division? If that's the case, a lot of people might be asking, what's the point? Again, this returns us back to the idea that console gaming will be treated as a niche market. They get exactly what they're doing. As the overall gaming community and platforms open up, Sony still understands that they're going to be serving a specific market in a certain way as long as they can, because that's going to be the way they want to play it. And that is why they are aiming for who they're aiming for with this. Sean Layden also said that he wants fewer, bigger PlayStation games. This is where I think the most important stuff comes in. There are 13 internal development studios in PlayStation's brand. Aside from the live services, the actual like God of War, Horizon Zero Dawn type games, he wants to pull back the developers' capacity so that they're working on these games longer, making better games, getting more both commercial and critical acclaim, and providing definite, specific reasons to buy a PlayStation, which is exactly what anybody who would buy a PlayStation, or really any game console, ultimately wants. And here we're talking like single-player games, games that are an experience, games that have a beginning, a middle, and an end, games that give you feelings and make you think and challenge you and push you. Not that competitive games are bad, but a single player game that is exclusive to a platform is a reason to buy that platform. And it's my opinion that this is a good strategy to absolutely make these high effort, high budget, high energy games, spending a little bit more per game, making a little bit less games, making their money back and selling consoles. that's a good strategy. In a lot of ways, it's kind of a doubling down on the PlayStation 4 strategy. The exclusives we got on the PlayStation 4 have been friggin' gold. Between, like I said, God of War, Horizon Zero Dawn, and Spider-Man, we've really just gotten some of the more amazing titles exclusive to the PlayStation this generation. Speaking of Spider-Man, Sony actually bought Insomniac Games because that game performed so damn well, and that makes perfect sense. Again, they're trying to figure out good reasons for people to play PlayStation exclusively, and a developer like Insomniac Games is absolutely a good reason for that. Now, all of this does show quite a bit of savvy as to where games are actually going. In theory, things aren't going to be a lot different for the near future, but in the far future, maybe a decade from now, the games industry probably isn't going to look a damn thing like it does right now. And in that respect, Sony really has a good thing going with the PlayStation 5 if it lives up to everything they're talking about, between the fact that their live services are not going to be exclusives to the fact that they are going to be doing backwards compatibility to make the transition between PlayStation 4 and 5 seamless as it possibly can be. Buying a new console won't just isolate you in this case. It'll actually be a continuation of where they are right now on PlayStation, but with better graphics, which is great. And whatever the next step is, it seems like they're prepared for it. However, we do also have to understand that them concentrating harder on fewer single-player games does mean there is going to be fewer single-player games, which does suck. And I hope that we don't get into an area of swan-songing the single-player game with the PlayStation 5, but we'll see. At this point, I think we have a decent idea of what Sony's thinking, but until we get a lot more hard information out of them, we can't be sure. What are you expecting on the PlayStation 5? Leave us a comment, let us know what you think, and if you like this video, please click like. If you're not subscribed, now's a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every day of the week, and the best way to see them first is, of course, a subscription. So click subscribe and don't forget to click the notification bell. As always, we thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter at Falcon the Hero, and we'll see you next time right here on Game Ranks.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to Newswave. Well, Nintendo won a court case in the UK, and while it makes sense for them to do so to fight against piracy, there is some questionable tactics that have been taken here by Nintendo, and I guess just in the UK. We're going to go over that because it's not quite as cut and dry, and it's hard to say how much further this could reach outside of the UK, but we'll go over it here. Then also, I want to talk a bit about apparently some other PlayStation events are being teased for later on this month. Not necessarily just that Last of Us Part 2 event that's happening for the media. There could be something else around the corner for us. We'll go over all of that and more today, guys. As always, if you enjoy these videos, make sure you hit that like button. It does help out, and get subscribed to stay updated on all the gaming news going on nowadays in the gaming world. Do this every weekday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern time, so come on by. We're going to start today with Star Ocean. Now, Star Ocean, of course, First Departure R was announced earlier this year. Looked pretty cool, right? And here's the thing. We didn't really know when it was coming out. We just heard it'd be coming out at least sometime later on in the winter time. Well, we now have a release date, December 5th. Originally, it was announced, and we thought, is that just for Japan? Or it looks like it's actually coming out everywhere. It's worldwide, December 5th. And this is good news. If you missed this game, this one looks to be the one from the PSP, just kind of made to look a bit better on HD sets and everything. They do mention that the visuals have been kind of cleaned up a bit. Does have dual audio. It currently has a price on the PlayStation Store at $20.99, so $21. It's also going to be on the Switch, of course, and then later on we'll probably see it, I think anyway, go to PC. But this is a great game if you missed it on the PSP, and of course you can pick between the PS4 or the Switch. It'll probably sell fairly well on the Switch, considering there's probably not going to be a major what else follows after the Star Ocean releases. Also, a bit of an update to the update from Nintendo, update 9.0.0. There was one thing that was pointed out. I just wanted to share with you guys so you knew this. It looks like 9.0.0 also added compatibility for those Super Nintendo controllers. Remember the ones that were introduced? Well, at least it's one. You could technically buy two of them. It's $30 a piece. But we did see those during the Direct. That was also added in the 9.0.0 update. WCCF Tech pointed this out that I saw, where the Super Nintendo controllers, the packaging and the listing and everything on Nintendo's site mentions that you need to have the latest 9.0.0 update. So good news there if you were thinking about picking it up. If you've already updated, your system's now compatible with those Super Nintendo controllers. I'm looking forward to grabbing at least one of them. I think they said they're supposed to start shipping in the next couple weeks, but I haven't seen anything in terms of being able to order it yet, but I'll keep you guys up to date when I do see an order page and everything go up, just in case you wanted to grab one or two. I'm definitely looking forward to it, mostly because it's going to be neat to, of course, be able to buy a wireless Super Nintendo controller from Nintendo again, and we'll take a look at that D-pad, although I think it's basically going to be like the Super Nintendo Classic controller. I mean, that's basically what happened with the Nintendo controllers that they sold, except they sold them in a pair. It'd be nice to get them single, though, here with the Super Nintendo controllers. Oh, and the world of game streaming continues to have more and more participants being added. Now, if you missed this completely, EA did announce, I think it was like at the end of last year, somewhere in there, Project Atlas, and that was going to be their own streaming service. That's right. We, of course, have several of them now. The big ones, of course, being Google's Stadia, Microsoft's xCloud, of course, those two, Stadia and xCloud, going against each other. But Project Atlas is something that EA is trying to get off the ground, and in order to do that, they're going to be having their own little private beta, kind of. It's a whole sign-up process. Now, they've already started this. This started very, very early morning on Tuesday, 1 a.m. Eastern time, and they're doing 4 different games. There's a full sign-up sheet you can check out. I'll leave in the sources below a link to an article that goes over all of this. But the games they're going to test include FIFA 19, Need for Speed Rivals, Titanfall 2, and Unravel, with the idea being we're going to test this across multiple different platforms, including PC, Mac, cell phones, tablets, and smart TVs. And yes, we're going to get to a point, this is going to happen, where we're going to have pretty much everyone with their own streaming service. Is that really what we all want? It's hard to say. Some people probably like the idea of game streaming services, much like, we have these streaming services for TV shows and movies and stuff, but those aren't really interactive like a game where you have inputs and everything and latency. So I don't know. I'm more frustrated with the idea of splitting up tons of subscription services, because that would get really annoying when it comes down to it. But we'll see what happens. EA being the latest one, trying to jump in the game streaming trend right now. And guys, some of the quick news out of the way, let's get into the bigger stuff. Let's talk about Nintendo in the UK versus devices that allow you to hack your Switch and essentially download games and play them on your system, piracy. It's something Nintendo's been fighting for a while, since, of course, it's so easy to hack the Switch. Like you do with a paperclip, right? But we do have some places selling their own software to go along with that, to make it even easier for people to load backups that maybe they find online, right? They're not their actual backups at home. They are using someone else's backup that's been uploaded to the internet, that's been downloaded thousands of times. So, of course, Nintendo might want to fight against that. And in order to do that in the UK, they have won a court case now that seems to block different sites in the UK through ISPs. Now, I'm actually going to go over a quote that was released here, kind of just giving us an idea as to what happened. Today, the UK High Court found the sale and distribution of circumvention devices for the Nintendo Switch unlawful. Nintendo is pleased that the UK High Court has confirmed that dealing in devices or software that enable piracy on Nintendo Switch systems is unlawful. The decision will help protect the UK games industry and the more than 1,800 developers worldwide that create games for the Nintendo Switch platform and who rely on legitimate sales of games for their livelihood and to keep bringing quality content to gamer. These circumvention devices, which enable the use of unauthorized copies of video games, jeopardize the businesses of those who uphold and rely upon the sales of legitimate products. So what's happened here is Nintendo has gone through the court system in order to get these different websites blocked in the UK. Now, what's really funny is I didn't really see any articles or anything name the websites that were blocked, which was a little weird to me because, well, I guess that should tell you something about that. So Here are the 4 websites. We have teamexecutor.com, sxexecutor.com, sxflashcart.com, that's the R4, and then executoros.com, which is also Stargate3ds.org. And Team Executor has been, we've talked about Team Executor before, right? They've released different products that even had source code or just code in general that was like copied at one point. It was a whole thing. It's really funny to think about like what they're selling as a shady product that then has shady code in it because they've copied it. So like the shady product is even more shady. It's a whole thing there. But consider this. Nintendo appears to not have been able to get them to just be removed. Like, I guess they couldn't knock their website down or anything. So what they decided to do was go to the UK and have them basically pass through a court system to then have the ISPs block these websites from customers. That's the questionable part here. Is it actually, like, do they have a case to have these websites removed? Because that's something that I would have expected. If it really is as unlawful as they say and everything, I guess it depends on different parts of the world and all of that, but can they really not get these websites just yanked down or sue them or go through there rather than tell the ISPs that they have to block these websites from customers or people in the UK? Here's the other thing. Most people who want these, they'll just use a VPN. Like the people who are going to go through this already have some technical knowledge because there is a bit more than just here's a paperclip, bam, and now I have 30 games on my Switch that I didn't pay for. It's a bit of a longer process to that. So a VPN is a pretty easy workaround that I would assume would work fine. And then they're just doing it all over again. I guess the idea here is they're making an effort. They're setting an example, which is you're going to be blocked in the UK now because we've gone through the courts and won. That's all I can really see here. I don't know if this is going to affect things too much. It might be the start of something. I don't know if they're going to be able to do this elsewhere, though. I think, at least to me, questionable to have the ISP block websites when you're a paying customer. It's very weird, but that's the route we're going. Nintendo is ruthless. Sony's ruthless. Microsoft's ruthless when it comes to this kind of stuff. So yes, they will use any means necessary to block it or have it taken down. But let me know what you think about this. And if it's a bit more questionable or to you it's cut and dry and you say, nope, block them, no piracy, no homebrew, we're moving forward without it. Next up, we'll talk about NBA 2K20 because it's not doing so well. So, of course, we talked a bit about the overwhelmingly negative reviews that seem to be going up on Steam, specifically around the game being full of, gambling stuff, slot machines, loot boxes agree with card packs and everything, microtransactions, the secondary currency that you buy, all of this stuff that's not really basketball and just introduces a grind. We all get that. But even more on top of that, for a game that brings in quite a bit of money, there seems to be quite a few glitches and bugs and all kinds of stuff going on. In fact, there was a trend on Twitter, hashtag #fix2K20, because people were just fed up with it. Like, the game is buggy, it's broken in some cases. People are pointing this out so much so that the hashtag managed to trend on Twitter, which does make me wonder what happened. I mean, it's a yearly series. Why are there so many issues when most people look at these things and they don't see a lot changing year to year? Of course, there's the joke that it's a roster update for $60. And to a degree, I look at that and say, yeah, that's kind of what it looks like, right? But then we have things like the taskbar icon still being NBA 2K19, despite it being 2K20. And you do start to wonder, where's the effort going here? Because that slot machine looked real good. It looked like they put a lot of detail. Had the handle, had like the nice shine on the knob at the top, the little red ball at the top of the handle and everything. Everything spun real well. They had extra shadows on it. The game doesn't work correctly when you're actually playing basketball with glitches and long load times and a taskbar icon that's outdated. It's a weird situation, but I get why that hashtag would trend, and we'll see if 2K decides to fix it before 2K21 comes out. Next up, let's talk about these Sony events that seem to be happening. We know about, of course, the one on the 24th that appears to be for media. I don't know even if that's going to be live streamed necessarily. I don't know if that's a whole event for any of the public. That could be something where they are just inviting different press outlets in to either play the game or ask questions for interviews, all kinds of stuff there. And then it's set up as an embargoed situation where later on they can then talk about the game as they put up.
Simon and Joe both invest in stocks. Simon uses eToro to invest.
Up articles and videos and all kinds of stuff, but it looks like we may have another event that week, and that could be a couple of things. And this came from Daniel Ahmed, who posted on a forum talking about how this isn't something to console mode, and then boom, you can plug it into the TV. So we got SN, but I think
Hello and welcome back to No Bullshit. Today we turn to talking about a new version of the Monopoly board game called Miss Monopoly. And it has a very interesting rule set that's certainly going to make a few heads turn. In an effort to pander to social justice warriors and to virtue signal about their wokeness, Monopoly Hello and welcome back to No Bullshit. Today we turn to talking about a new version of the Monopoly board game called Miss Monopoly. And it has a very interesting rule set that's certainly going to make a few heads turn. In an effort to pander to social justice warriors and to virtue signal about their wokeness, Monopoly's company Hasbro has decided to make a female-centric version of Monopoly called Miss Monopoly. Miss M will not only be catered to and directed at a more female audience, but also the game will have rules within itself that will give girls artificial advantages that are based on long debunked lies about the workplace and American society. First, let's look at this tweet from CNN, which spells out the new girl favoring rules. It says, unlike the classic game, women will collect 240 Monopoly bucks when they pass go, while male players will collect the usual 200. It's a fun new take on the game that creates a world where women have an advantage often enjoyed by men, the creator said. Well, I have to say, my curiosity is certainly piqued here. What is this illustrious advantage men have over women anyway? Because while I can admit there are certainly differences in between the sexes, I would hardly call it an obvious advantage which men certainly enjoy without question and without a doubt in all situations. I mean, CNN and Hasbro are both assuming this advantage to possible parity. It honestly looks like something kind of biased pro
Any gay. Any gay. You know what? Any gay.
Female game actually proves the opposite of Hasbro's point. They are claiming to be pro-women and they're giving them special treatment because men have had supposed advantages for years. But really, giving girls special treatment here and in this way is actually nothing new. And women getting favored and hired and promoted and recommended because they're women, well, that's something that's been true in this country and in business for a good long while now. Think about it this way. Do you ever think there would be a major corporation who would pander in this kind of way to men? Let alone would they consider themselves virtuous for doing something like that. Hasbro acts like they're saving the world here too, and they act like they're donating to some sort of charity case when they help the women's. Seriously, they act as if women are handicapped or have cancer or something, kind of belittling the ladies when you think about it. And sure, advertising towards men obviously happens too, but they don't promote our products to males by telling us we're victims and then also shitting on women. In fact, most pro-male advertising involves sexy and positive representations of women in order to draw in the dudes. And at the same time, girl ads in current year involve lying to women and treating them like children and also shitting on the men while they do it. I guess that end part goes to show that women like to shit on men, because why else would advertisers shit on men as a way to attract women? And okay, so we've already went over how women have plenty of advantages of their own. So next, let's talk about this idea that more men in certain industries or jobs or professions implies that there's some sort of sexism there against women. This is certainly a type of pro-SJW talking point that's being assumed here, and it's something that always comes up in feminist rhetoric too. For example, I was previously going to do another video about a very similar issue. Recently, Forbes magazine came out with its list of the top 100 innovators right now. Unfortunately for them though, they didn't realize that list would get backlash because it has far more men on it. Because instead of going with the most obvious and straightforward reason for that, and the true reason, which is there's more men on the top innovator list because there's more men innovating and working in technical scientific fields. But instead of going with this easily provable, obvious answer, the radical left-wingers, of course, blame this all on sexism, implying not only that the men who got onto this list don't deserve it, but also they're saying the whole industry, Forbes, and the world is all sexist against women. And this claim is not something they have ever really proven either. And it's based on a wild and categorically large assumption that is pretty obviously false and not true. Having more men in a certain job, field, or on a certain Forbes list doesn't make that wrong, sexist, or offensive to women. Believe it or not, men are just better at and more attracted to certain types of jobs. Women are too, by the way, and that's why there's always been more female nurses, teachers, or models or strippers. But these female-dominated fields are not offensive to left-wingers, and they're never called sexist by the SJWs either. Really, it's because they just want to force themselves into male spaces, usually because they're going after bigger, better, and more high-profile jobs and careers, and more profitable ones for that matter. I mean, do you ever really hear SJWs calling for more females to be forced into the garbage truck driving profession or into ditch digging jobs? Because I've never heard that, and that's because they don't. They don't want to be put into shitty jobs. They want to be artificially inserted into cushy, high-paying science, tech, and entertainment gigs like being innovators, movie stars, and CEOs of major corporations. So with all that said, more men in a certain career obviously doesn't make that sexist or unfair. Unless you want to say nursing and teaching are also sexist and unfair too. And unless you also want to push for more males to be models and porn stars and to get paid more than their women counterparts. Because if not, then you're obviously being a hypocrite about all this, and your claims aren't actually true or based on facts either. Lastly, do we even need to debunk the actual gender pay gap anymore? I think we all know that that study does not prove that men make more more than women in unfair ways at all. And it's not at the same jobs either. Really, men make more on average because they work more hours at more dangerous jobs. With that in mind, women actually already have all the same opportunities as men, and they could easily start working more and applying for more dangerous and more physically demanding jobs if they wanted to. But the truth is, they don't want to. And that's because the truth is, women don't actually want to work more, and they don't want to work these jobs. As much as SJWs and feminists try and cry sexism about it, and they try and encourage or sometimes force women into certain jobs, well, at the end of the day, girls just prefer to do what they're doing already. And there's nothing wrong with that either. I hold nothing against ladies who want to work less hours at more chill, office-like jobs. I would do the same thing too, and there's no shame in it. In fact, the only people actually shaming women is other SJW women who are basically telling them that their life choices aren't good enough here. And unless they go and make more money and work these kinds of jobs that they aren't drawn to or interested in, then they treat them like there's some kind of failure and there's something wrong. And while I say this is okay, and the women are doing just fine, women are great, in fact, and they have every right to continue doing what they're doing right now. In fact, I think it's noble of the ladies to sit back and let the men take care of them in some ways like this. Most dudes actually don't mind going to work and pulling in some extra hours as a way to support their wife and family and to keep them at home more when they can. Speaking of families, there's an eerie answer as women get when they stay home, game off the
for this. Insustentável.
Wild vegan activity lately. Like I got 3 to 4 news of vegans doing the same shit. Like they go onto farms, they break in basically. It's the mainstream media refuses to use words that the population understands, like breaking and entering, robbing, stealing. You know, no, they're like, oh, some activists went and protest. No, just tell what they did. So apparently this time in Canada it happened. They decided to go to a Hutterite colony. And if you wonder what the fuck is a Hutterite colony, then it's a good question. See, if you think Christianity is a weak religion, which I genuinely think so, it's like turn the other cheek. Like, what the fuck is turn the other cheek? I do not comprehend. No, not comprehend. Like, no, you file a fucking lawsuit. All right. If someone fucks with you, you make sure they're not going to fuck with you in the future, but they're going to leave other people alone. Right? You make it costly for them to mess with you. File a lawsuit. That's what you need to do. But no, the Hutterites are even weaker than Christianity. Like they're absolute pacifists. Okay, and they live in their own communities. They dress modestly. These are the type of people that aren't going to do any type of aggression because it's against their religion, right? So this is like a subsect of Christianity. They didn't think Christianity is a weak religion enough, so they had to make it even more weaker. And you will notice that these are the people that the vegans decide. So there's been some wild vegan activity lately. Like I got 3 to 4 news of vegans doing the same shit. Like they go onto farms, they break in basically. It's the mainstream media refuses to use words that the population understands, like breaking and entering, robbing, stealing. No, they're like, oh, some activists went and protest. No, just tell what they did. So apparently this time in Canada it happened. They decided to go to a Hutterite colony. And if you wonder what the fuck is a Hutterite colony, then it's a good question. What the fuck is a Hutterite? See, if you think Christianity is a weak religion, which I genuinely think so, it's like turn the other cheek. Like, the other cheek. I do not comprehend. No comprehend. Like, no, you file a fucking lawsuit. All right. If someone fucks with you, you make sure they're not going to fuck with you in the future, but they're going to leave other people alone. Right? You make it costly for them to mess with you. File a lawsuit. That's what you need to do. But no, the Hutterites are even weaker than Christianity. Like they're absolute pacifists. Okay, and they live in their own communities. They dress modestly. These are the type of people that aren't going to do any type of aggression because it's against their religion, right? So this is like a subsect of Christianity. They didn't think Christianity is a weak religion enough, so they have to make it even more weaker. And you will notice that these are the people that the vegans decided to target. All right, like they're not going to go on some Islamic farm where they're using ancient ways of slaughtering animals. Like they're not zapping them in order to kill them. They're not going to go there because they're going to get their asses kicked. And not only that, but the Muslims also have organizations to back them up. They also have like
Care.
I came, I saw, I read.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Red Ice Red TV. With us today, we have lined up for you an important show, a lot of recent news, a lot of things happening actually, and I'm glad to have back on the show again, Black Pilled or Devin Stack. It's great to have you back again. How's it going, Devin?
Going good, good. Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, you bet. It was, was it 2018 sometime? I forget the date. I think it was actually about a year ago, October, I think it was actually. We spoke last time. So it's great to have you back. Videos on YouTube.
The double-barreled NES debut of American publisher Bruderbund. Now, here's another double trouble debut, this time for Japanese arcade giant IREM. Admittedly, IREM was no stranger to the NES by 1987. We saw 2 of their games way back at the console's American debut in the form of Kung Fu and 10-Yard Fight. However, both of those games came to the console courtesy of Nintendo themselves. Not only did Nintendo publish them, they also handled the task of converting them to the console in the first place, a quirk of video game history that inspired a small amount of drama at the time. According to former IREM producer Scott Sumura, Nintendo liked IREM's Kung Fu Master arcade game so much they wanted to license it as a first-party title. Sumura's team had already pegged it as the game with which to make IREM's Famicom debut, however, and declined the offer. So Nintendo president Hiroshi Yamauchi went over to Sumura's head and signed the game with IREM's boss, effectively I came, I saw, IREM on episode 51 of NES Works. Last episode, we saw the double-barreled NES debut of American publisher Bruderbund. Now, here's another double trouble debut, this time for Japanese arcade giant IREM. Admittedly, IREM was no stranger to the NES by 1987. We saw two of their games way back at the console's American debut in the form of Kung Fu and 10-Yard Fight. However, both of those games came to the console courtesy of Nintendo themselves. Not only did Nintendo publish them, they also handled the task of converting them to the console in the first place. A quirk of video game history that inspired a small amount of drama at the time.
If you watch my
According
YouTube,
to former IREM producer Scott Sumura, Nintendo liked IREM's Kung Fu Master arcade game so much they wanted to license it as a first-party title. Sumura's team had already pegged it as the game with which to make IREM's Famicom debut, however, and declined the offer. So Nintendo president Hiroshi Yamauchi went over Sumura's head and signed the game with IREM's boss, effectively sniping it from its own creators. To sweeten this deal, Nintendo allowed IREM's team to manufacture its own carts with built-in LED lights, and also brought arcade football game 10-Yard Fight to NES for the American launch. Fast forward nearly 2 years later, and IREM finally makes its way to the NES, both under its own steam and with the help of, yes, Bruderbund. September 87 saw no less than 3 IREM titles hit the US, though the third, Deadly Towers, merits an episode all to itself. For now, here's Spelunker and Scoon. Spelunker makes a nice companion piece to the last episode of NES Works. Much like Lode Runner, this is a Western computer game whose Japanese release for Famicom took on a life of its own and has outlasted the original work's legacy. These days, Spelunker is probably known best in the West for inspiring Derek Yu's Spelunky. For the first 25 years of its life or so, however, Spelunker lived on as a work that blurred the line between cult favorite and mainstream work over in Japan. Released toward the end of 1985 in Japan, Spelunker caught the tail end of the initial Famicom boom and quickly garnered interest for its explosively harsh design. Its release date made it a contemporary of Super Mario Bros., Challenger, and Atlantis no Nazo. Action games with a high degree of difficulty and dense world design. It's one of those games that remains seared into the memories of Japanese game enthusiasts of a certain age. IREM continued to capitalize on its popularity by selling reissues and merchandise right up to the point that IREM gave up on making video games and sold the rights to Tozai Games. IREM didn't create Spelunker originally, though. The original version of the game dates back to 1983 when it first appeared on American computers courtesy of a company called Micrographic Image, which had spun out of Atari 2600 publisher Apollo Games around the time the US console market soured. Spelunker was designed by a guy named Tim Martin, a man who believed that life can only be fully appreciated if you experience death as a contrast. Well, no, okay, I made that up, but Martin definitely took his share of virtual lives. You could almost consider Spelunker the original Kaizo game, as it demonstrates the sort of nastiness one finds in tricky Super Mario Maker levels or indie games like I Want to Be the Guy. It offers zero mercy and is loaded with little gotcha traps, like unexpected pitfalls or uneven surfaces that bounce the players back into a pit unless you approach them just so. Spelunker isn't particularly a large game. It consists of a single cavern divided by a series of gates, and if you know what you're doing, it only takes 10-12 minutes to complete, with speedruns clocking in at around 7 minutes. What makes this whole thing such a daunting proposition is that Spelunker demands perfect performance from players. Your adventurer has 3 lives in which to complete his journey, and the tiniest error is instantly fatal. You discover this immediately as you descend into the cavern by way of a small elevator. Unless you leap off the elevator to the ground next to it, a requirement that isn't immediately intuitive, you will fall to death in your very first action. Not that falling to your death is hard to do here. The Spelunker himself deals with verticality even worse than Mario did in Donkey Kong. He can't survive a drop from his own height, which is a real shortcoming when you're exploring a cave full of uneven surfaces and ropes and platforms. Your goal in Spelunker is to reach the treasure at the end while collecting all the gold you find along the way. But you need to collect many other items as well. You need both blue and red keys in order to open up the gates to the end, not unlike the design of Montezuma's Revenge, which shipped the same year as Spelunker. You need to collect flares, which will stun the bats that hover overhead, dropping curtains of deadly guano. There are also glowing icons that recharge your air meter, and pickups that give you random perks. All the while, you have to be mindful of how you leap, climb, and walk, avoiding falls while also evading geysers of steam and other natural hazards. Periodically, a ghost will materialize and hover toward you, and you'll need to pause once it draws near to gun it down. You'll also encounter a few one-time scenarios like a minecart that has to be steered through curtains of flame and a floating bucket bobbing in an underground reservoir.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Red Ice. Great to have you with us today. We have lined up for you an important show, a lot of recent news, a lot of things happening, actually, and I'm glad to have back on the show again, Black-Pilled or Devin Stack. It's great to have you back again. How's it going, Devin?
Going good. Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, you bet. It was, 2018 sometime? I forget the date. I think it was actually about a year ago, October, I think it was actually. We spoke last time. So it's great to have you back. What have you been up to? Keeping, of course, up with making videos on YouTube and everything else. How are things going on the censorship front? Always important to check in with people. Are you losing subs? Are you losing views? What's the trend like for you?
Ever since I would say like April, I know that they delisted me out of some part of the algorithm because my views started just, plummeting from there. And now it used to be about every other video would get demonetized. And now every video gets demonetized right when I release it. And then if I appeal it, about 10% of them will get remonetized. But, I'm not really doing it for the money necessarily. I mean, the money's nice, obviously, to keep the lights on. But even if they demonetize my whole channel, hopefully they don't. But if they do, I'll keep making content. So if they're trying to discourage us, I think, honestly, they're just making us more nimble. They're making us look into other ways of coming up with content we can monetize, like book, for example. A lot of people are doing books, or they're doing Patreon exclusives and things like that. It's stuff that I'm going to be looking into. I know JF's doing that. What is it? Entropy? It's like a plugin for when you do live streams, so you can still get super chats through like a third party. So they can try to shut us down, and they they're a private company, and I'm sure Trump will monitor it closely as they do whatever they can. But in terms of actually getting this off the internet, it's never going to happen.
No, I don't think so either. And as you said, we have to become much more intelligent and cunning, I guess, in a way too. We have to employ techniques that are new. We have to think outside of the box. It does it puts the same, if you will, in a way, environmental or evolutionary pressures to a certain extent on us that it does to animals that, hopefully go on later on to become really successful at survival, right?
Right. Well, it's kind of like the opposite of what Julian Assange was saying, that secrecy breeds incompetence. And meaning that, of course, when they do everything in secret, there's no oversight whatsoever. They're just using nepotism, hiring their friends on and their family. You're invariably going to get bad people doing a bad job because there's no one there's no oversight. And so by essentially doing the opposite to us, where they're applying insane amounts of unfair oversight to us constantly, they are forcing out maybe some of the weaker links, but they're making some of us stronger and making us able to do our jobs better. So yeah, I mean, I wish they weren't doing it, but at the same time, it's making us better. It's making us more effective.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. And so speaking of censorship, I think we could dive in right away and talk a little bit about some of the stuff that's happened today. We have important news, of course. We're on September 10th today, the time of this recording, which means tomorrow, the 9/11 anniversary coming up 18 years ago. Can you believe that? It means that the people who were born around that time now can, go out legal, at least in Europe, right? Go out and drink and drive cars and stuff. Is it lower in the US, maybe with the car? But anyway, that means they're getting into adulthood. It's amazing. 18 years ago. And boy, has the world changed, Devin, since then.
Yeah, no, I still remember I was getting ready for work when I flipped on my TV, which is an old CRT tube TV, and watching it. And in fact, actually, on my channel, I put this up last year, I think. I gathered every single broadcast and every piece of footage that I could find, at least, from 9/11, and I stitched together one big, long, synced up viewing of the event. So if you weren't old enough to remember that day, and you just want to see what it was like to see that unfold in real time, I believe it's something like 4 hours long or something like that. It might even be longer. But if you just look at my channel, I forget what it's called. It's like 9/11 something. But you can, or maybe it's called 9/11 in real time, and you can just sit there and watch it, and it's synced up to all the different broadcasts. And in fact, the Twin Towers, every piece of footage that was available is also synced up. So it might change cameras when I had to, but it's a good way to at least go back in time and kind of experience that. It's kind of surreal to do it. It was really weird to edit it and to make it. But I think it's worth watching. It might make you, mad. It might make you sad. I don't know, but it's for me when I was editing it, it was kind of emotional to watch it. You see the people trapped at the top, leaping from the top, trying to escape the fires. You see, in fact, when I was doing this, there was a lot of footage I didn't even know existed because it didn't exist for the public until Freedom of Information Act requests made it available to people. So there's some angles that you might not have seen before, but pretty much there was always a camera on the Twin Towers, starting with the first. In fact, the first airplane that's someone captured that. There was a guy, I think it was a French cameraman that was there interviewing firefighters.
Yeah, the Renault brothers. I think it was a brother team.
Yeah, and then he just happened to lift the camera up because he heard the plane flying over and just barely caught it. But there was enough cameras even back then. Now it would have been you'd have like a billion angles of it. But even back then there were enough cameras rolling to where from that moment on there's always a camera on the towers. So if you want to check that out, obviously it got demonetized like right after I posted it, but it's worth checking out.
Was that a recent video or is your channel here?
No, I think I put it up last year. In fact, I think I put it up after 9/11, which from a marketing standpoint was probably a bad idea, but it took so long to put it together.
Yeah. Oh, I know how that goes. I'll make sure to find it here later and we can link it up. So a lot of things, we're a little bit later too, folks, for you guys who are tuning in. I do want to talk with Devin about the PewDiePie issue, about him giving $50,000 to the ADL. I want to talk about Barbara Specter, a number of things that's happened, even the Bolton situation. Of course, tangentially kind of related to 9/11. We'll get into that with him being fired and stuff like that, some of the reactions. But this was a funny headline that I saw from the BBC here just before we got on. Was CIA too white to spot 9/11 clues? In other words, BBC is actually blaming white people for 9/11 because they weren't really as diverse as they are now, I guess, 18 years later. So back then, the CIA, if they just had maybe, I don't know, more Muslims, they could potentially have prevented this from happening. That kind of makes sense, right?
Well, I mean, in my opinion, I'm kind of in the Ryan Dawson camp. So I think fellow white people were responsible for 9/11.
No, I totally agree. I was gonna preface this. All these days you get lynched if you don't preface the topic with like saying, "Oh, I have there's questions. We know that it's all kind of phony and all that kind of stuff." So I'm glad you brought that up. But no, that's definitely worth. Again, the funny thing with it is that they're willing. BBC, other media outlets, to entertain and turn every single stone, including just turning on the people that were attacked on the day, right? To blame them as opposed to actually look at who really did this.
Well, if you think about it, it's a brilliant way of kind of distracting from people looking at who really did it. Just like when Elon Omar was saying, some people did something or whatever that was, where all the boomer conservatives lost their minds and they were like, oh, it was Muslims. They hated our freedom. And they got box cutters and, learned how to fly jumbo jets in like a week. And so I think it's just another one of these situations where you're going to have these boomer conservatives who instantly take the bait and say, oh no, like it wasn't the white people in the CIA. It was Muslims that hated our freedom, and I think that's just another, every time they do that, it just gives them another chance to reinforce in the heads of these boomer conservatives to believe the official storyline of 9/11. So it's really frustrating that that's one thing. I don't know why I thought this, but I did think that you look at the interview of Trump on 9/11 where he's talking about how he heard bombs and and he looked like he was dubious about the whole thing, and I think even at certain points, or maybe even during the election, or during the campaign,
I think.
He said like, oh, we'll get to the bottom of this. I stupidly thought that we might actually see, I also thought Hillary would be locked up and in prison by now, but and that we'd have a wall. But like that was one of the things that I was kind of hoping we get to the bottom of, because right now we're living a lie. Like our entire foreign policy is built on a lie, and just not even just the foreign policy, just domestic policy, like the Patriot Act. We had all these conservatives fighting for Kavanaugh to make it in the Supreme Court. Well, Kavanaugh was with Bush on 9/11 and helped write the Patriot Act. Like, if it's really doubtful, or at least in my opinion, that he's not, he doesn't understand the big picture of what happened. And so we have people that are in high places working alongside Trump. One less today, I guess, because Bolton's out of there. But we have a lot of people working alongside Trump who know what happened and aren't telling us, because for the same reason they're not telling us what happened to Epstein, because they don't want to, information is power, and they want all the power. So it's another, every 9/11 that comes by that we don't have at least some kind of acknowledgement from the government of what really happened. It's just another black pill to me, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, it is tragic that it's so impossible to get people to ask questions about it and open their minds a little bit to entertain some different ideas as opposed to just what the lying mainstream media. And I mean, that's really been a point which has been hammered away the last 2-3 years now with Trump in office. I mean, there's been an incredible schism. And if he has brought something good, it is his incredible ability to have the media turn on him in such an absurd way that people are like, whoa, wait, like, what the hell is happening? Like, they've gone totally insane. They lie. They just make shit up. They just, there's no shame in these people. But what people need to realize is that this was the case before Trump as well. It was just that it wasn't so blatant because they didn't have a guy that they were fighting so hard against in such a high position, at least. So there has been some kind of good things coming out of this. But yeah, no, I agree with you. I mean, it's like he's out now, John Bolton, as the national security advisor, which is good, because I remember when he was brought on, I was almost like, all right, that's it. This is over. Trump bringing on the same old neocons that want to just bomb other countries on behalf of Israel and stuff like that. So not sure that this will actually change anything, depending on who he brings on, of course. But with Trump's concerned, not much has come out of it, sadly.
Yeah, well, I think you're right in terms of, to give you an idea, I used to believe the official storyline of 9/11. I even bought a copy of the 9/11 Commission Report, and I would make fun of truthers. And, of course, some of them were kind of insane.
So that was Cass Sunstein, right? The promotion of these kind of exceptional wackos within the field, so that you could kind of say it's all crazy conspiracies. Right. Anyway, I digress. Go ahead.
It's holograms, or it's a nuclear missile, or that was the thing, is you hear a lot of these crazy versions of it, and you'd be like, all right, no, it was just I really believed it was Muslims that just hated us for our freedom, or something I just maybe didn't understand. And really what did help solidify it for me was looking at the media in reaction to Trump. And because even I'd say as recently as 2015, I was still kind of on the fence about a lot of this stuff. Mm-hmm. I was starting to be a little more open-minded, but I was kind of like, well, I don't know. Like, could they really lie about all this shit? And then you see it and you're like, well, holy shit, they really do lie.
Most of it, yeah. I mean, it's what, like 85, 90%, I'd say.
Yeah. And once you see how centralized media has been since for the last at least 70 years or so, it's really easy to understand why this would be something they'd have down to, like a science. It's something that's been a well-oiled machine for so long. And so it would, especially in the 90s or in 2000, it'd be so easy to pull off something like 9/11. Like, it used to sound like, oh, how could you coordinate something like that? Well, that's pretty easy if you really don't have the internet, if you don't have an ability for the people who may have saw it themselves, which there are a lot of people, a lot of first responders and whatnot, that will tell you a totally different story than the official story. But you would never hear from them because they're not going to be put on MSNBC or CNN or NBC or any of these alphabet networks. So, and now that we know that that Project Mockingbird probably was never canceled, there's a revolving door between the intelligence community. Even now, you have Clapper works for CNN or MSNBC or whichever one, and Brennan, same thing. I mean, they're not even hiding it now. Like, you have the heads of the intel community that got caught red-handed, lying to the public over and over and over again, just walking in after they walk out of their government office into a media office. And so, and the frustrating thing there is obvious. This should be obvious to anyone at this point. And there's still a lot of people who don't get it because they're just not tuned into what's going on. And so there's still some of that residue where you have people that they do get their worldview from just what they glean from pop culture and from late night television and stuff like that, where they don't actually do the research on the internet. But I think that's changing, and I think that'll change big time once that generation dies off, essentially.
This is why they're trying to shut it down, Devin. Obviously, we know that. Control information. I mean, warfare is now information warfare. That's recognized. All the intelligence services know this, and I wanted to show this quickly. There's so much interesting things to break down, like just what you mentioned there, but I don't know if you're familiar with the Smith and Munt Act, which is essentially a way they repealed the ban on propaganda in news agencies. In other words, there used to be a ban on propaganda that if you're as a television station or even as government comes in and feeds a media network or something with intentional misinformation, you could end up in trouble, legally speaking, if it was found out and stuff. But that was repealed. Says for decades, so-called anti-propaganda law prevented the U.S. government mammoth broadcasting arm from delivering programming to American audiences. That was revealed. I forget what year that was. This was published in 2013, so it was not too long ago, I guess, which is kind of interesting. But it means that they can legally disseminate fake news and propaganda to the American people. And there's a specific arm, I forget which one it was. I was reading up on this just the other day, but it's not fresh in my memory. That's right, the Broadcasting Board of Governors, and they have huge budgets. They are feeding outlets like Voice of America, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, and the Middle East Broadcasting Networks, only to mention a few. But as you said, the Mockingbird people, they're embedded in essentially, I'd say, every mainstream media outlet at this point.
Yeah, no, and I remember even after 9/11, or maybe it was during the Gulf War, I forget specifically, but there was a little bit of a stink where the State Department was giving information to different news outlets, and they were reporting it pretty much word for word. And maybe it was 9/11, because I remember George W. being the guy in the news conference when he got called out about it. And so it used to be something that people cared about. And then you have essentially, you mentioned Voice of America. That's essentially the propaganda broadcasting network that we have for the rest of the world, because there's parts of the world where they don't have national news, mostly like in Africa, places like that. And so they tune into our propaganda to get their news. And, it was used during the wars and stuff like that to propagandize the enemies. And now that exact same propaganda is being turned against the American public. So
that's right.
And there's nothing illegal about it. And I worked in media long enough to know that reporters are lazy. And if you send them a press release that they can just read, 9 times out of 10, they'll just do that instead of having to actually do their job. So
that's right. No, the intelligence services, they provide them with the information, and they're just the dissemination arm of it. There's only very little original investigative reporting anymore, to be honest. It's propaganda, agitprop, it's coercion, it's fake news, or it's just straight from the intelligence agencies and the spooks, essentially. So it's crazy. So this shit is going on, ladies and gentlemen. You can't. Every time I've personally have intricate knowledge of story or been the subject of a story, even if it's it's been on CNN and shit like that too, Red Ice and stuff we do. But every time I've been part of it, every time there's been either intentional misunderstandings or they misconstrue information, they misquote, they don't understand certain things, they mispronounce, they don't got the names right, they didn't get dates right. It's just error after error after error. And I know that because I was like part of it. I know the truth of some of these stories and the claims they make and the lies that they make up and shit like that. And so I just kind of started adopting that idea. Well, if they get this wrong about everything that I personally have knowledge about and know, then why would there be any different with any other story virtually? This is the standard now. It's insane.
Well, just before we came on, I got a Google alert. I have a Google alert set up for anytime my name gets mentioned, and I got a Google alert because Media Matters included me in some story where they said that I was thrown out of a Biden event. And I've never even been to a Biden event. So
That's what I'm saying. They just make shit up, these people, you know? That's funny.
I would love to see their source for that. I was like, oh, that's interesting. I was thrown out of a Biden event.
And I read on Media Matters the other day that Red Ice is still monetized on YouTube. Well, great. That's news to me. So it's like the fucking liars. I'm sorry for the bad language, folks, but you know, it is funny, but it's frustrating at the same time because there's no recourse for us, right? They lie, they make it up, and then these are the sources and the references that they use for the Wikipedia pages. And once it's on there, it's white supremacy and racist and neo-Nazi and all this kind of nonsense. And then that's what people get a hit for when they search Google first. You know what I mean? And so it is defaming. It is frustrating. But at the same time, I guess at the same time, it's like if you're not grinding against the wheels of this machine that we have that is viewing us as enemies, if it hasn't turned on you to kind of at least here and there display some kind of wrath against you or try to destroy you, you're not doing something right. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, and the thing is, the difference is we are all, almost everyone I can think of, well, actually everyone I can think of, we're all self-funded and we're all self-motivated. A lot of these people have, in the opposition side, they have money coming in from billionaires. And so, you know, for example, JF, I think yesterday or the day before was talking about how he was just trying to go into Wikipedia to change Paglia's
I saw that one. Yeah,
to include her views on underage sex, and it was doing, following all the Wikipedia rules, and like within moments of him making the change, there was already some guy in there deleting his post, and so they have these people that are like vultures that I think are paid. I mean, I don't think there's probably a few of them in their mom's basement doing whatever, but I think there's people that get paid to monitor these Wikipedia pages, and they just go in there and they slander people on the right, and they protect the profiles of those on the left. And unfortunately, that's just the way that it is. Like the power structure in the world right now is the globalist left. That's just the way it is. And so they are holding all the cards. They control all these platforms. There's not a single really right-wing platform or even, I was talking to someone the other day. I was like, what we need to do is we need to find billionaires on our side that'll actually fund these projects.
Absolutely.
But then you think about it, it's like, we're kind of against their interests. They would never fund us because the kind of things that made them billionaires are the kinds of things that we're fighting.
Not necessarily. I mean, it could be inventors. It could be people who have just come up with some interesting solutions. They could have, sold companies or something that still have if they open their eyes and realize that's happening right now, especially to the people of European descent, the substitution agenda, the blatant open hostility, bigotry, and racism against people of European descent, etc., they would be like, hey, wait a minute, I got some money. I could help these outlets out and make sure that they can continue to get the word out. I don't think that that's an impossibility moving forward.
Well, I think it'd be possible, but it would almost have to be someone that's like retired, because if they're not, they still have, if they're a billionaire, presumably they still have to do business with all these other billionaires. And so if they're the odd man out, they're the one guy on the block that's going to start
there are anonymous ways. There's cryptos, and there are things they can do.
So I would love that. Yeah. If I just suddenly got like 100 Bitcoin dropped in my Bitcoin wallet.
Well, folks, the addresses are on in our descriptions, so you know what to do. Go ahead and donate some. No, but I do think though. I do think that, there's not fewer and fewer people that are concerned with this. There's not fewer and fewer people that are opening their eyes, realizing what's happening. It's quite the opposite. And that's why the establishment has gone so hard, I think, on individuals like us, organizations and outlets and people who are talking about these kinds of subjects. Broad scope from just anti-globalist sentiments to the open borders, the mass migration, substitution agenda, all these kinds of things. And I think that at some stage there's going to be a kind of a tipping point where a vast majority are aware. I'm not sitting around waiting for that, relying on that, but I think that is going to include some rich and powerful people that will actually share our concerns, to be honest.
Right. No, it would require some institutional established power, because I think one of the things that people kind of make the mistake in thinking is they think that, for example, like if there's let's just say worst case scenario, there's a civil war type of scenario in the United States. This idea that a bunch of boomers with AR-15s could just go storm the Capitol and force them to arrest Hillary and stuff like that's never going to happen. If you had, even in that kind of a scenario, you would need the help of governors of states, local National Guard divisions. You wouldn't be able to just get a bunch of your friends in a bunch of Jeeps and just take over a state or something like that. So if for anything drastic to happen, anything that's really going to make, I think, a change, you have to rely on institutional power. And obviously, ideally, the peaceful way would be better. And the peaceful way would require, obviously, institutional power and some kind of established power structure. And that's one thing we lack right now, too, is, there's a lot of these voices on the right, all these different YouTube channels, all these different podcasts, all these content creators, but we don't have any infrastructure. We don't have any foundations. We don't have a legal team. We don't have anything like the ADL or something like that that has our back. We don't have. We're all kind of just scattered islands in this ocean, and I think that's something we should focus on moving forward, especially with the legal stuff, because I feel like a lot of cases we have legal grounds to do stuff, like in terms of the demonetization with YouTube. I think that when you're being unfairly singled out, and especially if it's in response to a third party, Vox Day has brought up tortious interference. If a third party tries to interfere with your business relationship, in this case, this would be like Red Ice and YouTube, or Blackpilled and YouTube. You have a third party like SPLC or ADL say, these guys are haters, and so you need to deplatform them, and then YouTube actually responds by doing so. That's tortious interference, because they're purposely stepping in and destroying or attempting to damage a business relationship you already have. So if we had lawyers, if we had the ability to bring lawsuits against these organizations, because Lord knows the SPLC's just got hundreds of millions of dollars. They could just wait you out if you tried to sue them. So if we had some kind of nonprofit where we'd had some pro bono, competent lawyers, I think a lot of this stuff would be if not taken care of, they'd maybe be a little more shy about just randomly deplatforming people if they thought there was going to be some kind of legal repercussion.
I think go ahead.
As much as I give PragerU a lot of shit, they are suing YouTube right now.
Yep.
And so it'll be interesting to see where that case goes.
I agree. It was a good video. I saw it by the attorney that's representing them. Forget his name now, Robert something. And it was a good video. It explains it in detail, specifically about the heart of the matter is, are they a platform or a publisher? They do have special protections under 230 of the Communications Decency Act, which they're in violation of now, because now, of course, they are acting more like a publisher as opposed to a platform, because they're deciding what goes and what doesn't. And then you have, just rightly as you said, third parties that have stepped into the picture, like the ADL, which has been a very, very, very effective and powerful bullying and lobbying organization that essentially either have some kind of, I'm not saying that they're threatening YouTube. I don't think they have to. I do think it might even be personal relationship on the back end or something, which is enabling these people to get a foot in through the door, and then effectively, literally releasing hit lists on their own website and telling them, they're entered into partnership with YouTube now, where they say these channels, remove them, take it down. And in most cases, YouTube has complied with those kinds of demands. And as I know you saw it in passing too, if we're going to fight these organizations, it doesn't help when people like PewDiePie is donating $50,000 to the ADL so they can continue with their legal activities and attacking people and defending themselves later on when they're brought to court. Because I think, Devin, just to pick up on that note as well, they are pushing the limits, and at one point there is going to be a class action lawsuit against maybe not only YouTube and these organizations, potentially even the ADLs or SPLCs, because, as you say, rightly so, they have limited the business opportunities for countless independent companies and organizations that do media and many other things, us included. And I don't think that that's going to last forever, to be honest. What do you make of it?
Yeah, I mean, as far as the PewDiePie thing goes, I think he's kissing the ring. You know, like the same sort of thing happened with him, right? Like he said a couple things in a stream. I don't remember specifically.
I think it's just a good
what
feeling
they were.
knowing you're paying.
Go ahead.
Yeah. But no, I don't remember what specifically he was saying on his stream, but he said, I think like the N-word or something like that. And he had some big contracts, like big millions of dollars with Disney. And as soon as it got pushed by whatever it was, BuzzFeed or ADL or whoever it was, he lost millions and millions of dollars just over his gamer language in a gamer stream.
Yeah.
So I think, I mean, I do fault him because it's not like he's hurting for cash. You know what I mean?
No.
I mean, PewDiePie has got enough money to where he could just stop making videos right now and he'd be good to go. So it's a little weird to me that he feels like he has to do this. And, you know, it's greed really is what it is.
He's trying to save his own skin, essentially.
Right.
And then siding with the biggest bully organization on YouTube, which is the main coercive force in why YouTube has become a censorious platform.
Right. No, he's kissing the ring.
He's selling
he's telling him he's going to play ball. And you know, I know there's a lot of delusional people on 4chan that are going to be very upset when they hear this news.
Let me play the clip. See what actually.
Poor guy.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, he's not. Listen to this. Here's the portion.
For the video. But as an additional celebration, I'm donating $50,000 to Anti-Defamation League, which is an organization that fights bigotry and prejudice in all its forms. Thank you, honey, for sponsoring this video.
It moved on quickly from that, but that's a lie. They actually are not, because they are actually spending the majority of the time targeting individuals, organizations, groups that are specifically pointing out racism, bigotry, hatred, especially against people of European descent, of course. But that's why they're targeting people like us and many others on YouTube and off the YouTube platform in other settings. I do believe that they are responsible in bullying financial organizations into dumping us. We've had our personal accounts shut down with PayPal, Wells Fargo, Venmo, Zelle, Coinbase, and a number of other things. And I can't prove that it's the ADL, but I think it's the ADL, right? So they are extremely vicious organization when it comes to targeting individuals that they do not agree with. And again, you can have a message which essentially is about pointing out double standards and exposing the kind of hatred that is acceptable now against people of European descent. And that's considered to be hate.
Well, and that's the kind of thing, if we had the money or the backing to have a lawyer or some kind of organization to sue the ADL, that you'd find out in discovery. You'd find out, were they the ones that talked to Wells Fargo? Were they the ones that talked to Coinbase? And then that would open up Coinbase and Wells Fargo, et cetera, to legal liability as well. And so all it takes is really to have that initial suit filed and get discovery, get these documents, these internal documents and the internal communications to really see how this is going about. Like what is this machine how does it get from some guy, some volunteer somewhere at ADL watching a video that triggers them to the creator of that video losing their ability to bank, you know? And so I think it's something that needs to be done. It's something that we need to look into doing. I know there's talk of that union right. in Germany, but I don't think that's going to really be, I mean, that might help a little bit, but that's YouTube specific. I think there should be some kind of organization that the dissident right has. You know, even though we may have wide variety of views on different topics, you know, and disagreements on certain things. I think if we could come together in some way or another and at least agree that we should all have the right to speak and maybe pool our resources in some way. I don't know what that would even look like, but I think that's something that we should be looking at going forward.
Yeah, I mean, class action lawsuit, and of course, Google has now opened up to being the investigation, right? All these attorney generals from 50 states and territories in the U.S. have opened an investigation into antitrust when it comes to Google's practices, specifically within advertisement and search. They had a press conference, I believe it was yesterday. I watched that. It was pretty good. and one of the attorney generals had essentially said that he's also leaving the door open to investigating other areas, which would, of course, stretch from election meddling to censorship to interference to subversion, essentially, as well, because of the way that they are choosing and disseminating data or search results, or who gets to be listed first, or what kind of information. I mean, these are big issues. I think that this process is just starting. I think as well, Google or Alphabet, which they're the head company called now, they acquired about 230 or 270 companies in about a 2-decade period, swallowing up essentially every competitor, startups which they saw as a threatening factor, and things that they just wanted to accumulate. So they have just crossed the boundary in so many different ways. And again, I'm not surprised that it's taken this long. But the problem is, and I think you kind of alluded to that too, Devin, that the relationship now between the Googles and the Apples and the government is it's so weaved together, right? I mean, they get massive amounts in subsidies, which would make it a clear violation of the issues of free speech, you'd think. But then you realize at the same time that the government is now asking these companies for favors when it comes to like spying on people. Even Trump was proposing using Amazon Echo and the home device that Google offers to spy on people with this red flag law issue. Did you see any of that?
Yeah, that's some scary stuff. That's the kind of thing. I had a friend that got a Alexa, and I was like, "What are you doing? You're putting a machine in your house that's, it will be abused. It's gonna record you. I mean, because the way that Siri works, for example, is or even like the Google version of that, and even the Microsoft version of that, they record constantly. They're always recording, and then it listens for that trigger phrase, and when it hears that trigger phrase for it to be activated, that's when it launches. But it's always recording. And in fact, the speech recognition, at least with the phones, doesn't take place on the phone. It takes place on a server at Apple. So when you say, like, even when you're just dictating something on your phone with Apple products, it's actually uploading your voice in real time to a server at Apple. Then it's doing the transcribing there and then sending the text back to your phone. That's why it doesn't work if you don't have a signal. And so everything you've ever dictated, everything that you've ever dictated to, whether it's on an Apple product, a Microsoft product, on a Amazon product, a Google product, like your voice, and it's really compressed. So it's not like they don't have the storage capacity to store this stuff. It gets stored on a server somewhere, and there's no way to know like how long do they keep that, and if they keep it for they could keep it potentially forever. It's like that huge server farm the NSA has in Utah, where that's specifically just there to store all the internet traffic that they're able to steal. And then they use this weird logic where, okay, well, it's not really an invasion of privacy if we promise not to look at it until we have a warrant. And then once we have a warrant, we can retroactively look at everything we've ever gleaned from your connection. And so companies like Apple and Google and Microsoft, they could essentially use the same logic. They could say, oh yeah, well, we're recording and storing everything that you say around our devices and putting it in this massive database, but we don't look at it unless law enforcement asks us to look at it. And now just think of like every conversation you've ever had around the device, and it might not even have to be yours. It could be a device that your friend has that's listening and for his trigger, and it's still getting uploaded, it's still getting recorded, and then they can use voice mapping to find out, to differentiate your voice from their voice, and they can add that to your file. Like, oh well, here's something that Devin was saying on this other person's device, and so we'll just put it in his file, and then they can go back and if they're doing the red flag stuff. And this is the Trump administration, by the way, that was talking about doing this. This isn't like Hillary Clinton's plan. So the Trump administration could just say, hey, I need to look at everything that do a search in this database that has essentially a recording, a transcription of everything Devin has ever said around any device that was listening, which is like everywhere. Any time there's these words, like terrorism or whatever the list of words ends up being, then you can send us, the relevant paragraphs, and then you have some faceless, or maybe it's just even an AI. And who knows? It might not even be a human at that point that determines based on how many hits you get in this database, how often you've said these bad words. That okay, this person is no longer allowed to own a weapon, and it just contacts the authorities to come in and swat you. So it's
crazy.
It's really kind of freaky.
Right.
Yeah, and so that's something that everyone should think about. If you've got one of these Alexas in your house, or if you use any of this dictation stuff, just realize that that's what's happening. Even
a phone. I mean, it does, and that's been revealed like multiple times now. It doesn't matter, even if it's off, it can buffer and store, and then even then when you later turn it back on, or on and off the internet connection. And this is stuff that we don't think about, but as you say, all this stuff is being stored now, and eventually down the road when they start building profiles, or again, another agency is created, another maniac politician comes in and takes over and just like, we got to stop all terrorism and kind of to weave this into a little bit what we talked earlier about 9/11, that all those things that they set up at that point to protect us and save us, like the Patriot Act and all these kinds of things, it's draconian Homeland Security and stuff. All that now, if you look at how the rhetoric has changed as well, has essentially turned into, it's actually the white nationalists that's the biggest terrorist threat now in America. Forget about Al-Qaeda, forget about these Muslim terrorists who haven't had too many attacks in recent years. So now the new enemy is these white people who think that they're being, they think that there is a substitution agenda. They believe that it's unfair, that the borders are open and stuff. And actually, they're very dangerous because they could just go out and shoot anybody at any time, although the statistics for that are like minute, and you get shootings from every walks of life in all these kinds of different fields as well. People at gaming conventions shoot up people at the back to school parties that go up and shoot each other, or gangs that shoot each other every damn weekend in some of these cities in America and Europe as well now. But the point is, it's the rhetoric, right? It's what they're deciding to hone in on with these judicial hearings on white supremacy and white nationalism and stuff. So we're seeing where this is going. If you see what I'm saying, that all those things that were put in place by these draconian measures early on are now being shifted and refocused to turn towards domestic terrorism, essentially.
Yeah, all it would take is one person like Kamala Harris getting elected, and look at the way that the Obama administration totally abused the FISA warrant situation with Trump. And look what happened to them. Nothing. There was again, this goes back to the whole no oversight, no accountability for the ruling class. So if they're not afraid of abusing it. I mean, nothing happened to Lois Lerner when she was using the IRS as a weapon against the Tea Party. Nothing happened to the people responsible for Fast and Furious with giving weapons to Mexican drug cartels. Nothing happened to really anybody except for Julian Assange, the guy that told us about a lot of this stuff. So if you have a Kamala Harris administration, there's going to be no incentive for them to not use it because there's no oversight. And even when they do get caught just by accident, which is the case with the Obama administration with the FISA abuse stuff, nothing happens. Or with Hillary Clinton and with the email server, nothing happens. And so there's no incentive for them to not use it. And in fact, they're just going to be further emboldened. They're going to want to use it because right now it's still embarrassing when they get caught, And so if they can use this technology to not even get caught, then which they could do, they could use this technology to find out that journalists are even talking about this sort of thing. It's kind of like they had that. Well, what was the Batman movie where he accesses all the different phones and starts like making this 3D map of everything, and it was one of the ones, Christopher Nolan ones, one of the
Dark Knight or something, or
and then he's like, this power is too great, I need to destroy it. Well, I mean, I knew then that was something that we already had. That was something that government was already using. So all it would take is the wrong person, and if you look at the demographic shift, if that doesn't get turned around, I think it's too late for that. That's inevitable. So it's not even a matter of if this is going to happen; it's just a matter of when. So
I love the whole system, which is just have honed in on like white people are the problem, right? Kind of thing. So all these securities and things were put in place by like, the Muslim threat, right? And then ironically, a lot of Americans and Europeans were like, yeah, we have to do something about this. And yeah, but surveillance, control, we're going to curb this chaos. And then it turns out the whole machine, I mean, a lot of people, including, Red Eyes and people like us and stuff, were talking about this in the early days when these things were being rolled out, like this will just be used against us eventually. I'm very suspicious about it. Obviously, something has to be done about like if there's genuine terrorism, but in many regards, you do have sting operations, you do have setups, you have situations where the establishment intentionally let their guard down to let something happen, or they even groom some of these individuals like we've seen. And then they just use that as an excuse to kind of, take more control, to offer more security and to keep us safe. And then it's just being used against us, essentially, at the end of the day. It's a horrific situation, but they're very clever. I give them that much.
Yeah, well, and 9/11 obviously is the greatest example of that. And you have to understand, like, that's who we're up against. We're up against people who, to get what they want, are totally okay with morally justifying killing over 2,000 of the people that it's their duty to protect, and then use that not only to pass all these surveillance laws that they were able to pass domestically, but then to use that also to kill more people in the Middle East to get what they want in terms of the contracts that they wanted and the friendly governments that they were hoping to install. So we're up against people who really don't care. If they want to make an omelet, they know they have to break a few eggs. It's not going to keep them up at night. So
yeah, and then
to keep in mind.
No, that's right. And then also keep in mind that that's the excuse which we've seen the whole wave of migrants into primarily Europe, obviously piggybacking on the Syrian and the Iraq war, but all of those things opened up, in the beginning with the Afghan war, then the invasion of Iraq, which was done on a faulty lie about WMDs. That's come out. That's, now they're sitting around talking about this with Tony Blair and Bush and, Colin Powell and these people who lied us into this shit. And it's like, oh, well, yeah, we made a wrong assessment kind of thing. Well, look at the damage now that, all those wars open up for ISIS to be created in the region, which, of course, also we have a lot of questions about. Who's funding them? Who's allowing them to be there? Why is it that the coalition forces, like in Syria, when they had the chance to eliminate ISIS in their last stronghold in Raqqa, let them escape into Turkey? They have had drones and air flights right over this huge convoy of like 4,000 ISIS soldiers just going into Turkey, and then they have vanished into Europe and stuff like that. They funded and supported a lot of these people at the end of the day too. But so all of this is kind of like it creates this combined image of like globalization, the war, all the contracts, the mass migration waves, then the subsequent substitution agenda of the people in Europe and stuff like that. So it's all tied together. There's a rhyme and reason to this supposed insanity that we're seeing right now, especially in the Middle East.
Right, and it all comes back to 9/11. I think 9/11 really was a paradigm shift. I think that's when, a lot of this stuff has been set in motion a long time ago, and and there's always been this kind of backroom dealing and
O São Paulo já trabalha e apitando teu queira. Sai, João, sai.
Daemon X Machina did absolutely nothing for me when it was revealed at E3 2018, and I didn't even bother trying the prototype demo that came out earlier this year. But as a fan of mechs and games like Zone of the Enders, something about Daemon X Machina made me want to give it a fair shake. So I jumped at the opportunity to review it with a completely open mind, and I came away at least a little surprised. Daemon X Machina takes place after an event known as the Moonfall, where a piece of the moon was dislodged and fell toward the planet. This caused an apocalypse event where the entire region became near uninhabitable. However, a new resource known as femto was discovered that led to major technological developments. It also marked the emergence of the Immortals, mechanical beings that have the ability to corrupt AI and turn them against humanity. Now, mercenary companies under the guidance of an organization known as the Orbital Link fight against the Immortals in order to both put a stop to them and preserve a tenuous balance between nations. That may seem like a simple enough story to follow, but it's an absolute mess. You play as a rookie who has just awoken and are carried from one campaign mission to the next with a shifting cast from each of the different mercenary companies. And I felt utterly confused at every turn as the game presented character after character and terms which they barely explained. There's a history here that could be interesting, but I was barely able to follow it as I struggled to piece together what everyone was talking about. Make no mistake that parts of this story can be entertaining with some slightly amusing interactions, but the cast is just too big with over 20 different mercenaries introduced very quickly. When major story beats happened, Daemon X Machina was desperate for me to feel something for the pilots, but it never clicked. I didn't spend enough time with any one character to really care outside of a few of the more distinct personalities. It never got better either, even as I approached the endgame. But all that story can be skipped, allowing you to get right into the action. And it's here where Daemon X Machina can really shine. Players pilot mechs called arsenals, which can be fully customized to their liking. That's limited to just their color early on, but as missions are completed, new loot is acquired, which can take the form of arsenal parts for the head, arms, body, and legs, or as different weapons ranging from assault rifles, swords, sniper rifles, bazookas, flamethrowers, and missiles. All of these parts can be mixed and matched to create an arsenal that's truly your own, whether it favors speed, defense, or a mix of the two. The weapons I chose really did affect how I went about certain missions. I found a style I preferred after some experimentation that served me well throughout most of the game. So let's focus on gameplay a bit before diving completely into the customization. Once a mission is chosen, the player and any allies are taken to the battlefield where the objective will be laid out. It usually comes down to defeating all the enemies, but there is the occasional curveball where players have to defend key points or even do a semi-stealth mission out of the arsenal. The game knows where to focus its strengths, but the variety helps it from growing too monotonous. That being said, fighting wave after wave of corrupted AI units is fun for a while, but quickly grows tiresome. They just never offered that much of a challenge, even at high numbers. Instead, they're more of a way to get ammunition for the weapons you brought to the mission. Immortal arsenals, known as Stries, are a little more exciting as destroying them will allow you to loot the remains for new parts or weapons. It was great earning those rewards, but the Stries never offered up much of a challenge. No, the challenge and the best part of Daemon X Machina's missions came from facing off against another mercenary pilot or a giant boss. Because they can take so much punishment, you have to think on your feet. Suddenly, the amount of ammunition you use is a bigger deal, as is managing your health. It's a stark contrast to the dullness of fighting the usual enemies whose designs rarely change throughout the game. Fighting them grew old extremely quickly. But fighting other mercenaries at least forced me to pay attention, as they would zip all around the maps. It often led me to lose track of them and actually rely on my radar to find their new location. Finding the right weapon amongst the selection I brought to whittle down their health was fun, especially when I discovered something particularly effective. The fact that your arsenal can hold a weapon in each hand, plus a shoulder mount, and a support item, in addition to 2 more swappable weapons held in pylons, made me feel prepared for each fight. I didn't really need these normally, but they became essential against other pilots. Not only that, but you could loot them as well, making the reward that much better. Likewise, the bosses were a treat to fight almost across the board, being both physically imposing while also having unique attributes, such as jumping around an area or digging underground. It forced me to focus on exposing their weak points in order to cause massive damage and take them down that much quicker. While some could be annoying, there was always this grand feeling that shone through. Both showed how Daemon X Machina could feel fast and intense with these responsive controls. There's a lock-on that can be improved with different heads as well that made lining up shots easier, though keeping them in your sights while they zip around is part of the challenge. You never have to exactly strategize, but figuring out where to hit something and with what helped justify all the different weapons. These 2 types of fights made the game come alive, and it seems the developers at Marvelous knew this, as the exclusive online multiplayer missions all focused on them, whether it's beefier versions of the bosses or against 4 other mercenaries. The connection was consistent with only the enemy mechs blinking out for a few frames due to their speed. It was a surprisingly fun addition tackling these enemies with friends, and it didn't hurt that I could earn new equipment and decals for the single player. It all tied together well as a kind of bonus that you could work toward with friends. But the side and story missions have to be done alone. It feels like a slight missed opportunity, but at least it's possible to grind for better equipment with friends. Money is also earned from every type of mission, which ties back into the customization, as it can be spent to strengthen your arsenal further. There's a shop where equipment can be bought and sold, and the factory where existing equipment can be used to develop even better pieces, though it takes a single mission to complete the process. The factory also ties into attachments, which can be installed in your parts and weapons for stat bonuses. Finally, your character can be upgraded as well to improve their abilities both in and out of the arsenal. Whether I cared about their
Imagine you woke up one morning, made a cup of coffee, cracked a few eggs, and turned on your TV to some mainstream, so-called trusted news source like the BBC or CNN. You sit down to enjoy your breakfast and you hear the news anchor say, "Breaking news, we have confirmation that the sky is now green. I repeat, the sky is now green." You think that's an odd thing to say. I mean, the sky is blue, right? It's always been blue. You even look out your window to check, and sure enough, the sky is still blue. But the suit on the TV says it's green. And all of the guest journalists from The Guardian, The Financial Times, BuzzFeed, they're all nodding their heads and agreeing. The sky is indeed green, and it's bloody wonderful too. The news anchor then says, "Our Twitter feed is on fire this morning with reactions to this breaking news. Let's have a read of some of them." And he begins to read out a list of responses from people watching. Most are receptive to the news, but some agree with you. What do you think about this, Owen Jones?
Well, I think it shows the true level of ignorance we have in this divided country. How some people in 2019 can still believe the sky is blue says everything you need to know about the toxic brand of right-wing politics that rules over us.
The other journalists nod their heads and agree once again. What about you, Afua Hirsch?
Well, I think we need to redefine what blue actually means. These days, the modern incarnation of blue is more greenish. And to say the sky has always been blue is simply wrong and reeks of bigotry. Oh.
Everyone again nods and agrees, and they also agreed to call people like you backwards. You're stuck in your ways. You are anti-progressive, and worst of all, you are a sky denier. You aren't to be listened to. You aren't to be trusted. You are the past, not the bright green future we should be embracing. Your coffee goes cold, you lose your appetite, and you look outside your window at that beautiful blue sky and think, is it me? Am I the problem? I wish I could just be colorblind and not notice that the sky is actually blue when everyone else is saying it's green. Maybe I am just a narrow-minded skyist. I best not mention it ever again. Okay, a simplistic analogy there, but you get what I mean, don't you? We, in the West, live in a world where up is down, blue is green, and truths are lies. We go through our days being told to change our ways, to get with the program, to upgrade our thinking, because we are the relics of a more primitive, insular time. And frankly, our points of view just aren't acceptable anymore. No matter how ridiculous the claim, how completely and obviously inaccurate it is, if the powerful backers in the media want to push an agenda, they will do it. And if you aren't on board, you will be smeared, attacked, and made to feel like you are a bad person, like you have something wrong with you for thinking the way you do. But something has changed lately. The powers that be in the media are lashing out clumsily. The mask is slipping ever more. I was mainly inspired to make this video because of the mainstream media's reaction to my reinstatement on YouTube this past week. Up until recently, I've received very little attention from journalists, but it seems like the toys are really starting to get thrown out of the pram now. And it's interesting. Places such as the BBC, CNN, and Business Insider have directly mentioned me within articles, as well as other sites like BuzzFeed, for example. All in a negative way, of course. None of them are glad that I'm back on YouTube. Let's make that perfectly clear. And none of them said a word when I was actually banned. It was only when I came back that they decided to say something. Like I said, most of the articles just mention me by name. No real detail there. They just refer to me as a far-right video maker. Whatever. But CNN did something more. CNN put a hyperlink in their article on my name, which, when clicked, takes you to an article by BuzzFeed, who say a few more things. The Iconoclast has more than 200,000 subscribers on YouTube. In an interview with Defend Europa last year, the YouTuber spoke extensively about the white nationalist conspiracy theory of ethnic replacement. He describes himself as a British nationalist who is anti-mass migration. Interesting. The fact that CNN actually linked to this article shows how dirty they really are. The white nationalist conspiracy theory of ethnic replacement. Okay, so it's a conspiracy theory, is it? Well, I apologize. You see, I was only getting my information from mainstream left-wing news sources that have reported on white demographics for years. Silly me. Newspapers such as The Guardian, for example, which in the year 2000, 19 years ago, published the infamous piece, The Last Days of a White World. We are near a global watershed, a time when white people will not be in the majority in the developed world, Britain included. In Britain, the number of ethnic minority citizens has risen from a few tens of thousands in the 1950s to more than 3 million, or around 6% of the total population. While the number of whites is virtually static, higher fertility and net immigration means the number from ethnic minorities is growing by 2 to 3% a year. One demographer, who didn't want to be named for fear of being called racist, that's cute, said it's a matter of pure arithmetic that, if nothing else happens, non-Europeans will become a majority and whites a minority in the UK. That would probably be the first time an indigenous population has voluntarily become a minority in its historic homeland. I tell you what, the bloody Guardian and their conspiracy theories, eh? Shameful. How dare they write this article? I'm sure CNN will write something about this very, very soon. They'll call out this author. They'll find out who that racist demographer was and they'll dox him. Yeah, right. They aren't the only ones, though, apparently. The Independent has also written articles about demographic predictions. There have been countless pieces written about towns and cities in the UK becoming minority white British. The New York Times have written about how the looming white minority in America worries certain demographers because they fear a political backlash. I mean, why anyone would be angry about becoming a minority in their own country baffles me. It really does. And then, the best one, CNN's own golden boy, Anderson Cooper himself, openly chit-chatted about it on television, which was something I didn't know until Red Ice TV brought it to my attention. So thank you for that. Here's the clip.
Whites will not be the majority. I mean, it's an exciting transformation of the country. It's an exciting evolution and progress of our country in many different ways. Clearly, there's, among white supremacists, white nationalists, that is viewed as a horrific event.
See immediate how they spin that and turn that around. Yeah. Oh, actually,
I just realized that was an admission of what they are talking about. Actually, that's bad. You can't say that that's bad. If you think it's exciting, it's happening, and it's happening. But now, these white supremacists, though, they're crazy for thinking this is happening. It's amazing.
Oh, Anderson Cooper, a conspiracy theorist that could rival Alex Jones. It really is amazing. So yes, let me get this straight. Demographic replacement is a conspiracy theory, but hang on. We're saying it's actually happening and that it's a good thing. As Anderson Cooper says, it's an exciting change. So basically, the media will accuse you of lying if you don't support it, but put you on national television if you think it's good. Well, it's nice to know where I stand. Thank you, morons. But I have to ask these publications a very important question. So guys, if you're watching, which I'm sure you are, please get back to me. The question is, why do you care about me at all? Seriously, I have just over 200,000 subscribers on a website. You all get millions upon millions of clicks, huge advertiser revenue. You, the BBC, get publicly funded by chumps like me. You all have 10 times the reach I have. You all have access to all the right people. You have a default level of respect and acceptance purely because you are the mainstream media. And here I am, a 29-year-old bloke from a small northern town in England with a laptop and a microphone. What's the big problem, eh? I've been completely demonetized by YouTube, so financially I'm no threat to you. My videos get stifled by algorithms. My current subscribers don't get notified as often as they should about my new content. I'm barely ever recommended to new viewers. Meanwhile, funnily enough, you guys get promoted to the hilt on YouTube all of the time. Liberalism dominates Western culture. All of your political and social opinions are backed up in society. Everything you've ever campaigned for has been given to you. Abortion, gay marriage, trans rights, mass immigration, and so on. Hollywood is on your side. Big business is on your side. Transnational political unions are on your side. None of your journalists would ever get fired for preaching about their left-wing views on the internet. Your friends won't abandon you. Your family won't disown you. Every single thing that comes out of your mouths, gets written on your websites, gets uttered on your television channels, are the safest, most politically correct opinions that exist anywhere in the world. And you're all making a killing. So, again, the question, what is it about me and all the other channels that you have written about this week that you find so bloody worrying? Is it because, possibly, that I and the hundreds of thousands of people who follow me are still refusing to jump on the globalist bandwagon? Could it be that your handlers over at the ADL are starting to see that their brand of bullshit only flies so far? Or could it be the realization that if I and others had access to the resources you people have, all the money, all the airtime, all the corporate sponsorships, we'd blow you all out of the water. And your ideology would be a total laughingstock. And millions of people would happily join us and proudly proclaim from their rooftops that the sky isn't fucking green, it's blue. Always has been and always will be. Your worldview, your pushing of globalism is universally unpopular. The only hope you people have is censorship, because you know you simply can't compete with the truth. You can't compete with the public's views. Your only hope there is to wear down the people to such an extent that they will give up out of apathy. You know what I'm talking about. Stop Brexit. Refugees welcome. Trans men in schools. Gay pride 365 days a year. Hate speech laws. No white applicants allowed. Sexist, racist, fascist, Islamophobe. Pray for Christchurch. Take your guns. Sri Lanka, what? Charlie Hebdo had it coming. Diversity is our strength. British Empire, bad. Open the borders, let them in. More ping pong tables for murderers. Demographic replacement is exciting. It's not working anymore, lads. You've gone too far. You've blown it. And that's all I really want to say on the matter. BBC, CNN, ADL, we see you. Hiya. How's it going? Thank you so much for directing even more viewers to my channel this week. I'll be sure to treat all these new people very well indeed. Cheers. Thank you so much for watching once again. If you'd like to support this channel, you can do so via PayPal, the link is down below, or you can buy a copy of the Iconoclast magazine. Issue 005 is now released. I'm very proud of it, and I hope you enjoy reading it. The link to my website is down below. You can buy it in both physical and digital versions. I'll see you all soon. Have a good one. Bye-bye. The Iconoclast issue 5 has now been released. Once again, the last couple of months of my life have been dominated by late nights staring into a computer screen, but it's all been worth it. I am very proud of this edition. I think it's the tightest release yet, the most focused, and I hope all of you who are fans of the magazine will enjoy reading it. As always, the link to my website is down below, where you can purchase both the physical version or a cheaper digital download. This edition represents, more than any previous ones, the growth of nationalist thinking in the West amidst a ridiculous clown world. As I write in the foreword, things are getting so insane that we have an opportunity to really push the big issues like the demographic crisis, as the smaller, petty debates will take care of themselves due to the utter ineptitude of the jesters who are trying to force their madness down the public's throat. I believe the essays in issue 5 represent this notion very well, as well as regular viewers like you contributing content as always. A few familiar faces have pitched in to help out in issue 5 as well. My friends On the Offensive, Duke of Durham, and Laura Towler have all contributed brilliant articles to the magazine that I'm sure many people will appreciate and get something out of. I consider these 3 people my friends. I'm subscribed to their channels. I'm fans of these people too. And again, I really appreciate their input. You should go and subscribe to them as well and read the articles they've written for this magazine. These people are very articulate and they're a credit to our movement. I extend my thanks to them and all the other contributors that have made this release possible. As well as issue 5, number 4 is still widely available. And now, for a limited time, so are issues 3, 2, and 1. I know some of you have wanted the opportunity to collect every single copy of this magazine for a while. Well, here's your chance. Although I will say it was very interesting going through the older releases and seeing just how much I've changed. How different my stances are now compared to a couple of years ago. It's been quite a journey, to say the least, and it's not over yet for any of us. But for those of you who are fans of the magazine, I hope you really enjoy this 5th edition. And if you want to support my channel, the magazine really is the best way of doing so, especially in this new era of internet censorship we face. And you don't have to tell me about it. I experienced it a few weeks ago myself. You all know. But they can delete my videos. They can even delete my channel. They can't delete a physical magazine that you hold in your hand, that you can share with your family and friends. They can't take that away from us. They will fail in that endeavor, I can assure you. It's more important than ever to support alternative media and physical media as well. Once again, I can't state this enough. Massive, massive thanks to my writers, and thanks to all of you who keep this project going. I very much appreciate it, and I'll see you all again for issue 6 in the future. What do you get if you take terrified Western women, scarred by modernity, blighted by depression, conflicted with guilt and shame, and promise them a way out of that darkness, a way they can regain meaning and purpose in their lives, a cause they can contribute to, a movement where they will find value?
There is a growing group of women who say they are on a birth strike. They're too scared, they say, to have children because of what they call ecological Armageddon. Let's meet some of them in an exclusive TV interview Blythe Pepino, who is here. She's the founder of Birthstrike, and Alice Brown, who's 25, and says she's so scared about the future of the planet, it's actually debilitating for her. Welcome, both of you.
And I ended up getting depression for about a year, and everything came crashing down around me. I lost everything, all my friends, and my job stuff and my career, really. I felt like a hypocrite.
For me personally, it's about me being able to put my time and resources into activism at the moment. I'm lucky enough to have a certain amount of power in this world. I'm white and privileged, and I don't have any children. I don't have any dependents.
Why are you on Birthstrike, Blythe?
Because I'm terrified, and that's putting it mildly.
Each day for me is a struggle. I really do. I'm so depressed. I feel so hopeless.
One of the biggest battering rams used against the indigenous peoples of Europe is environmentalism. On the surface, it may seem like a harmless collection of hippie types comedically chaining themselves to airport runways. But underneath, it has always been a vehicle for inflicting yet more guilt, more shame upon us, for the lives we lead and the civilization we exist in. There are lots of sects within the green movement, but today I'd like to talk about a very specific and especially insidious element that I've noticed gain some traction in recent months. Allow me to introduce you to Birthstrike, a growing movement of mainly young, white, middle-class British women who are vowing to not have any children until the climate crisis is resolved. They may appear to have a small online presence, with their YouTube channel barely having an audience, and their official website being nothing more than a Tumblr page. But believe me, they are being promoted everywhere, with the mainstream media and other global platforms giving them airtime literally everywhere you look. It's interesting how that always seems to happen, isn't it? I'll go into more detail on the movement itself and its leader as we go through this video. But first, I'd like to examine the mere concept of Western women refusing to have kids because of environmental activism, and what this really means in practice. The population of Britain has ballooned over the course of several decades. We now live in a country with nearly 65 million people, and the projections only show this will rise in the future. For such a small island, that's an incredible amount. So you may think that these women, on the surface, are concerned with overpopulation and are just trying to do their bit, right? Well, you'd be wrong. As on the Birthstrike website, it very clearly states, Birthstrike disagrees with prioritizing population control over systems change in regard to tackling the environmental crisis, disagrees with any enforced population control measures, and recognizes the colonial violence of such measures having been proposed in the past and present. Population control measures. What, like strong borders and a competent immigration system, for example? Oh yes, those things are colonial in nature. They are violent, according to these activists. The leader of Birthstrike herself, Blythe Pepino, went on the BBC and clarified her stance on population control, claiming that she and the other women are simply too scared to bring kids into the world as it is, and they're against population measures.
This texter says, doesn't leave the name, I'm a woman not having kids because of the planet. Why do we keep breeding and suffocating ourselves? The problem is too many people on the planet. Why does no one see this? We would be culled if we were animals. Instead, we are culling everything. We are the threat. Ray says, guess what? The world is overpopulated. Anything to reduce the population has to be a good thing. How does your partner feel about your decision?
Can I just come back on that, actually?
Yeah.
Because that's a really important point. So a lot of people conflate what we're doing with advocating for population control. And population is an issue. Even if there was a catastrophic event mid-century, we'd still have numbers by the end of the century that would be a massive problem. But the fact is, and it's been proven, that if we don't change how we live now, we haven't got a chance. So the population is something we need to talk about, but it has to be voluntary. And so the changes that we could possibly make with population are just not enough to make any kind of difference.
I find this stance very convenient indeed. Because, let's be honest, it's a get-out-of-jail-free card. This is their way of letting themselves off the hook in talking about potentially insensitive things. Because it's simply an indisputable fact that the more people you have living in a space, the more strain and pressure the systems of that place will be under. Mass migration to Britain has skyrocketed over this time period, with the vast majority of people coming from outside of the European Union. Yet this unwillingness by environmentalists, especially mainstream political parties like the Green Party, to be honest and to tell the truth about the damage this does, essentially makes their entire political platform a joke from the off. Just as one example, we hear from politicians like the Greens all day long about how our precious public services can't cope, how there's a housing crisis in Britain and all that. Their solution is, as always, to throw money at the problem, just endless amounts of cash. That'll fix everything. But we know that's not the case. We know that the biggest factor in this issue is an unchecked rising population. Let's take the housing crisis. Estimates show that to keep up with population growth and demand, a new house must be built in Britain every 6 or 7 minutes. Now that is ridiculous. It's unsustainable. It is impossible. But the Green Party never mentioned mass migration being a factor behind this, and therefore I'm assuming they'll be more than happy to build houses all over the countryside to avoid being called racist. More bricks and mortar, fewer fields and trees, but at least that pesky colonial violence is kept under control, eh? Robin Maynard from a charity called Population Matters was quoted as saying, "Birth rates and migration fluctuate from year to year, but our already unsustainable population is continuing to rise, and that will continue until a positive strategy is put in place to address it. The government has announced ambitious plans to achieve a zero-carbon economy, but by ignoring our unsustainable population growth, it is driving with the brakes on. More people means more emitters and more emissions. Our growing numbers are incompatible with our climate change commitments, the health of our environment, and the quality of our life." Well, that sounds like common sense to me. More people, more problems. So perhaps part of the solution is to seriously restrict immigration to this country, first of all, and then to get rid of people who have no genuine or beneficial reason in being here. Until environmentalism fully acknowledges this point, they will remain a dishonest laughingstock. But the issue of population numbers brings up so many talking points that have been thrusted into the mainstream consciousness by our political enemies for a long, long time. Remember how we are often told that we need mass migration because our native birth rates have fallen below population replacement levels? If we didn't import all of those Pakistanis and Africans, well, Britain would crumble and die. And while it's true, it's so depressingly true, that native birth rates across the West are the lowest levels in the world, our leaders have never tried to fix this through effective policy. No, they've chosen instead to import the rest of the world and change our societies beyond recognition. That was their go-to answer. But we know that if the will and intent is there, the native population of a country can be rejuvenated and incentivized into having children of their own. Take Viktor Orban in Hungary, for example, who has rejected the mass migration globalist scheme in favor of saving his own people, and so far, his policies are having a positive impact. Laura Towler made a great video about this. I'll link it down below if you want to find out more. But like I said, the intent and will needs to exist in the first place, and it's obvious that Western leaders lack this mindset. and you can draw your own conclusions as to why. Again, though, this shines negatively upon the environmentalists, especially the birth strikers. White Western women aren't having enough kids anyway. So what possible effect do these girls think they're having? What added benefit to the environment do they provide by refusing to get knocked up? Well, that's just the thing. And the underlining point about all of this, nothing. Literally nothing positive is being achieved here, at least from our perspective. Because these women don't actually care about the population growth, as Blythe said on the BBC. But if you are an environmentalist, that has to be on your mind. That has to be on the agenda. If we can go back to birth rates for a second, we can see that, yes, the West is the lowest, but the highest rates belong to the third world. Africa and the Middle East, to be more specific. Africa is the big one, though. Oh boy. Over the next century, Africa's population is set to explode to over 4 billion people. If you think Africa has problems now, what with poverty, disease, and corruption, well, you haven't seen anything yet. When will these women, who are sitting in nice, warm television studios preaching the beauty of self-sacrifice, when will they address this situation? When will they hop on a plane and, sorry, too many carbon emissions there. When will they string a wooden raft together with their armpit hair and sail to Africa to lecture those women about the dangers having children poses to the natural world? When will they preach that they too all go on a birth strike? And the answer is, they never will. They'll continue to lecture to their core audience, white Western women, to further their own people's demise with the backing of the mainstream media, yet say nothing about the expansion of Africa. All the while rallying against evil colonial border policies or population control measures, allowing the no doubt millions of future so-called refugees a clear path from Africa to the West, further compounding our already deadly population crisis. And these people dare call themselves environmentalists. It seems the environment is the last thing on their minds. So who are the people behind this movement? What is their thinking? What drives them? It's now time to get personal, because the psychology of these women is merely a visible example of the effect decades of messaging has had. The leader of Birth Strike is a woman named Blythe Pepino. To sum her up, she's a walking stereotype. She is the perfect modern white liberal woman, exhibiting all the mannerisms and opinions required to be accepted within her sheltered metropolitan surroundings. Her background is primarily an artistic one, and she was in a pretty successful band called Volts, which was signed to a major record label, even having a song featured in the 50 Shades of Grey soundtrack. However, Volts broke up a few years ago, and Blythe hasn't hit the same musical heights since, which might explain why she's so balls deep in environmentalism right now. She clearly has connections within the media world, which allows her to be interviewed by newspapers such as The Independent about all manner of things like her polyamorous relationships, as if anyone cares. But it's simply another typical trait of women like her, isn't it? Monogamy is bad. Sleeping with loads of different people and never truly settling down is just the life of a strong modern woman, right? Rootless, hollow, just how Vice magazine likes it. Take a wander through her Twitter feed and you will see other shining examples of how Blythe thinks and acts. She retweets things like this: environmentalists shutting down coal mines in the north, my neck of the woods. This leads me to believe that the plight of the working class isn't something that really bothers her. The loss of industry leading to the destruction of communities, the lack of purpose these people might have, I doubt it matters. Because the only things that are important are shallow political statements like this, jumping on top of a bulldozer, and the self-delusion that these people are actually doing something positive. She also feels strongly about the refugee issue. Surprise, surprise. And according to an interview I read, set up her own refugee-centered charity a couple of years ago after she visited the Calais camps. How and why did you originally get involved with the current refugee crisis? I went to help put up shelters in Calais and fundraised cash. I protested a few times and then created a homegrown arts political project called Now We Make Tomorrow with my friends. I got involved because this is one of the worst refugee situations since World War II, and it is due in part to the actions of my country. A country whose wealth and status I personally benefit from. And so this is my way of feeding back in an unfair system. I don't believe I am any different to those people. I am not afraid of them. I am afraid of our lack of humanity in the face of their suffering. Already, I'm sure you can pick up on the guilt and shame that runs through her blood, but more on that in a bit. Back to Twitter, here's her retweet of a sign that claims the climate crisis is a racist crisis, because of course it is. Even though, as I mentioned, Africa's population will eventually engulf us all, and these people will stand by and say absolutely nothing about it. And finally, of course, we get on to the anti-white stuff. Blythe is a big fan of this bloke, a self-proclaimed Muslim activist, an educated man of colour, American by birth but a Pakistani by blood, and she posts his stuff all the time. Here's a good one. Dear white people, no one is asking you to apologize for your ancestors. We are asking you to dismantle the systems of oppression they built that you maintain and benefit from. Right, yeah, sure. What you really mean is dismantle your societies and willingly lash yourselves on the back for being fortunate enough to have ancestors who left you something great to inherit. Because that's bad, you see. Get it? The civilization, oh, it's trash. Ugh. And by extension, so are all of you. So they're the sort of things that Blythe posts to her followers on a daily basis. But last but not least, let's look at Blythe herself, her physical appearance. I think the word we're looking for here is androgynous, which is fitting. So incredibly appropriate. Because she, and women like her, have essentially been programmed to think all of these things, to get behind all of these causes, and to reject everything that might stem from tradition. Their politics are self-congratulatory and self-serving, but delivered through a vehicle of guilt and shame and self-loathing. Their personal relationships are flaky, and their vision for the future, far from being a positive one like they've convinced themselves it would be, would actually be nightmarish. It would be a world where everyone is as rootless as they are, where the progress humanity has made would be scuttled in favor of false equality, where our countries would be overrun with outsiders, and where we would lower ourselves out of shame. Blythe is the perfect example of what globalism wants women to be. They couldn't do better even if they made her in a lab, which is why she's all over the mainstream media pushing an anti-traditionalist message to young, terrified women, wrapping it in a noble packaging to make them feel like they'd be fighting for something great, when in reality, they'd be doing the opposite. One of those poor, scared women is this girl, Alice Brown. She appears on TV with Blythe often, but I first found her on the official Birth Strike YouTube channel, along with others, all of whom really do conform to a type. While I could no doubt say the exact same things I'm about to say about Alice about the other women, I want to focus on Alice because, truthfully, I feel sorry for her. I'm not being flippant here. I actually feel like she has been taken advantage of and led down a very harmful path. But let's hear what she has to say for herself.
I'm 24 and I am a geography graduate. I work for a small charity.
She's young, has a pretty useless degree, and works for a charity. Say no more. But notice how she's one of these people who has this permanent smile on her face while she speaks. It's always there. That's important.
I became aware of environmental issues when I started off my career as a radio producer, and I ended up getting depression for about a year, and everything came crashing down around me. I lost everything, all my friends, and my job stuff and my career really. And I just had a total reassessment of what was actually important. And then a whole new world opened up for me. Just this passion for the natural world.
Right, so forgive me if I'm off base.
Locals
sounds like Alice had a complete breakdown that essentially destroyed her career and sent her personal life into a downward spiral. In her words, she said, everything came crashing down around her and she lost everything. Lost everything. But then, what do you know? A light at the end of the tunnel appeared. A calling. A brand new world opened up for her. A world of activism. Being part of something. Feeling like she mattered. Feeling like her life had purpose again. Notice that smile stays fixed on her face as she tells us these things. This woman was literally depressed and in a dark mental state, and now suddenly, she's one of the poster women for rejecting motherhood. Do you think that's a coincidence? Do you think Alice has sorted herself out? Come on now.
I'm not on a career path anymore. There's no career for me. I actually don't see a future sometimes because I don't feel there's any point in doing anything until we're in a consensus together to make this a healthier and safer world for everything.
She's given up on her ambitions. She has stopped her life in its tracks. She doesn't see a point in doing anything anymore unless this utopian idea that's been put inside her head comes to pass. But that'll never happen, will it? We all know it, and I suspect deep down she knows it, but she can't admit it or see the truth because this new mission she's on is the only thing she has in her life now. That's it. This girl is hanging on by a thread, and I'm sure I'm not the only one who can see that.
Each day for me is a struggle. I really do. I'm so depressed. I feel so hopeless.
I'll link the entire video down below for you all as well if you want to check it out for yourselves. It's very interesting stuff. As an armchair psychologist. And like I said, the other women on the channel exhibit similar behavior. Scarlett's journey, for example, was sparked by guilt.
So I moved to the country a few years ago, and when I was driving to work one morning, I hit a deer, and I was devastated by that. I was really upset, and I felt that how could I be so upset and still be eating meat and eating dairy? It just felt, I felt like a hypocrite. And that's when I became a vegan, and that's when this whole new world opened up to me. And then a few months ago, I went on an environmental conference, and that really changed everything for me, actually, because I think it's sort of, I knew bits, I'd read about bits, I knew pockets of information, and then suddenly somehow it all tied together, the dots all joined up, and it was just bang, I came into awareness, came out of denial entirely, and felt like I was in reality for the first time.
She hits a deer. She goes into a dark hole of guilt, becomes a vegan, attends conferences, and now she sees reality. Just to simplify that little journey for you, this woman accidentally hit a deer with her car, and now she's part of a movement that is trying to convince Western women to stop having children. Well, that is quite a big leap, isn't it? From accidentally hitting an animal with your vehicle to being part of something like this. This is not a logical progression. This is rather sinister indeed.
Hi, I'm Nikki. I'm 24. I live in South London. I am currently doing my master's part-time in anthropology, environment and development. In some ways, it almost feels like the choice is being taken away from me, which makes me quite angry, because it's like, it's not... Yes, it's still very much a choice, and I'm still very, there's only been a few decades in history that women have had that choice. The contraception is relatively new, so... but just sort of like morally doesn't really feel like I'm left with much choice anymore. I have a deep love and respect for this natural world, and and I can't bear to see what we're doing to it. And I can't bear to bring a child into what we're doing to it either.
This one is called Nikki, and again, she talks about having choices taken from her. She talks about morality, and then says that she can't bear to see what we are doing to the planet. Yes, mixing morals with guilt doesn't usually lead to positive outcomes. And I mean, it's scary actually seeing clips of these women, especially Nikki here. I can't tell you how many girls I've met that remind me of Nikki, especially when I was in university. It's scary. These women, I believe, were vulnerable people, already somewhat worn down by modernity, searching for purpose, searching for something that would fulfill them, but that something was never going to be having children or living anything remotely close to a traditional lifestyle because, as we know, they've been pushed away from that their entire lives by the media and wider culture. So what do they find in the depths of their depression and profound sadness? A false cause, an empty promise, the possibility of meaning. Yet all they are doing is promoting harm and despair. They've been led astray, and now they are leading others astray too. They want to protect life on Earth, but they've been convinced the best way to do that is to not create life at all. To finish this video, what we're seeing here isn't particularly new, but I wanted to talk about it anyway. This is nothing more than yet another tactic to undermine us, to damage the West, and to drive another nail into the coffin of our people and our civilization. We must resist it. We mustn't fall for it. And for the love of God, if any of these women make you think of someone you know in real life, Christ, get to them before these weirdos do, will you? Thank you all so much for watching once again. If you'd like to support this channel, you can do so in a few ways. The first is PayPal, link is down below, or you can buy a magazine from my website. The next magazine is very close to release. It's just getting printed now by my printers.
The right colony, then it's a good question. See, if you think Christianity is a weak religion, which I generally think so, it's like turn the other cheek. Like, the other cheek.
Quickly! Barrett!
Give me a break.
Jesse! Barrett!
Where you been?
Tifa! Let's lay down some rubber.
Crank that drum.
Okay, you got it. Who's that?
A soldier.
Can't say this is quite what I had in mind when I asked for your help way back when.
Feels like we're flying high these days.
Now, more than ever.
He's a keeper, all right.
Yeah.
I'll see myself in. Thanks. And who are you? Now it's my turn. Hello, Aerith.
What do you want?
Wait a minute. Those eyes.
Corneo's got certain tastes.
Don't be shy, little kitten. Shimmy on over and give Daddy some sugar.
It'll be fine, right? After you.
You led us on a merry chase, Aerith.
Resist and we will use lethal force. You got your lethal force right here.
Trust me, sugar.
Well then, my dear students. Henceforth our lives will begin to tie our soul in. Book time! The hell we are! You still don't understand your role in this.
So if you're looking for an iPhone right now, I think it's pretty clear based on
Last episode, we saw the double-barreled NES debut of American publisher Bruderman. Now, here's another double trouble debut, this time for Japanese arcade giant IREM. Admittedly, IREM was no stranger to the NES by 1987. We saw two of their games way back at the console's American debut in the form of Kung Fu and 10-Yard Fight. However, both of those games came to the console courtesy of Nintendo themselves. Not only did Nintendo publish them, they also handled the task of converting them to the console in the first place. A quirk of video game history that inspired a small amount of drama at the time.
If you watch my YouTube,
to former IREM producer Scott Tsumura, Nintendo liked IREM's Kung Fu Master arcade game so much they wanted to license it as a first-party title. Tsumura's team had already pegged it as the game with which to make IREM's Famicom debut, however, and declined the offer. So Nintendo president Hiroshi Yamauchi went over Tsumura's head and signed a game with IREM's boss, effectively sniping it from its own creators. To sweeten the deal, Nintendo allowed IREM's team to manufacture its own carts with built-in LED lights, and also brought arcade football game 10-Yard Fight to NES for the American launch. Fast forward nearly 2 years later, and IREM finally makes its way to the NES, both under its own steam and with the help of, yes, Bruderman. September 87 saw no less than 3 IREM titles hit the US, though the third, Deadly Towers, merits an episode all to itself. For now, here's Spelunker and Spoon. Spelunker makes a nice companion piece to the last episode of NES Works. Much like Lode Runner, this is a Western computer game whose Japanese release for Famicom took on a life of its own and has outlasted the original work's legacy. These days, Spelunker is probably known best in the West for inspiring Derek Yu's Spelunky. For the first 25 years of its life or so, however, Spelunker lived on as a work that blurred the line between cult favorite and mainstream work over in Japan. Released toward the end of 1985 in Japan, Spelunker caught the tail end of the initial Famicom boom and quickly garnered interest for its explosively harsh design. Its release date made it a contemporary of Super Mario Bros., Challenger, and Atlantis Nunazo. Action games with a high degree of difficulty and dense world design. It's one of those games that remains seared into the memories of Japanese game enthusiasts at a certain age. IREM continued to capitalize on its popularity by selling reissues and merchandise right up to the point that IREM gave up on making video games and sold the rights to Tozai Games. IREM didn't create Spelunker originally, though. The original version of the game dates back to 1983 when it first appeared on American computers courtesy of a company called Micrographic Image, which had spun out of Atari 26-bit publisher Apollo Games around the time the US console market soured. Spelunker was designed by a guy named Tim Martin, a man who believed that life can only be fully appreciated if you experience death as a contrast. Well, no, okay, I made that up, but Martin definitely took his share of virtual lives. You could almost consider Spelunker the original Kaizo game, as it demonstrates the sort of nastiness one finds in tricky Super Mario Maker levels or indie games like I Want to Be the Guy. It offers zero mercy and is loaded with little gotcha traps, like unexpected pitfalls or uneven surfaces that bounce the players back into a pit unless you approach them just so. Spelunker isn't particularly a large game. It consists of a single cavern divided by a series of gates. And if you know what you're doing, it only takes 10 Micrographic Image, which had spun out of Atari 26-bit publisher Apollo Games around the time the US console market soured. Spelunker was designed by a guy named Tim Martin, a man who believed that Life can only be fully appreciated if you experience death as a contrast. Oh no, okay, I made that up. But Martin definitely took his share of virtual lives. You could almost consider Spelunker the original Kaizo game, as it demonstrates the sort of nastiness one finds in tricky Super Mario Maker levels or indie games like I Want to Be the Guy. It offers zero mercy and is loaded with little gotcha traps like unexpected pitfalls or uneven surfaces that bounce the players back into a pit unless you approach them just so. Spelunker isn't particularly a large game. It consists of a single cavern divided by a series of gates. If you know what you're doing, it only takes 10 micrographic image, which had spun out of Atari 26-bit culture, Apollo Games, before the time the US console market soured. Spelunker was designed by a guy named Tim Martin, a man who believed that life can only be fully appreciated if you experience death as a contrast. Oh no, okay, I made that up. But Martin definitely took his share of virtual lives. You could almost consider Spelunker the original Kaizo game, as it demonstrates the sort of nastiness one finds in tricky Super Mario Maker levels or indie games like I Want to Be the Guy. It offers zero mercy and is loaded with little gotcha traps like unexpected pitfalls or uneven surfaces that bounce the players back into a pit unless you approach them just so. Spelunker isn't particularly a large game. It consists of a single cavern divided by a series of gates. If you know what you're doing, it only takes 10 micrographic image, which had spun out of Atari 26-bit culture, Apollo Games, before the time the US console market soured. Spelunker was designed by a guy named Tim Martin, a man who believed that life can only be fully appreciated if you experience death as a contrast. Oh no, okay, I made that up. But Martin definitely took his share of virtual lives. Effectively sniping it from its own creators. To sweeten the deal, Nintendo allowed IREM's team to manufacture its own carts with built-in LED lights, and also brought arcade football game 10-Yard Fight to NES for the American launch. Fast forward nearly 2 years later, and IREM finally makes its way to the NES, both under its own steam and with the help of, yes, September 87 saw no less than 3 IREM titles hit the US, though the third, Deadly Towers, merits an episode all to itself. For now, here's Spelunker and Spoon. Spelunker makes a nice companion piece to the last episode of NES Works. Much like Lode Runner, this is a Western computer game whose Japanese release for Famicom took on a life of its own and has outlasted the original Works legacy. These days, Spelunker is probably known best in the West for inspiring Derek Yu's Spelunky. For the first 25 years of its life or so, however, Spelunker lived on as a work that blurred the line between cult favorite and mainstream work over in Japan. Released toward the end of 1985 in Japan, Spelunker caught the tail end of the initial Famicom boom and quickly garnered interest for its explosively harsh design. Its release date made it a contemporary of Super Mario Bros., Challenger, and Atlantis Nanazo. Action games with a high degree of difficulty and dense world design. It's one of those games that remains seared into the memories of Japanese game enthusiasts of a certain age. IREM continued to capitalize on its popularity by selling reissues and merchandise right up to the point that IREM gave up on making video games and sold the rights to Tozai Games. IREM didn't create Spelunker originally. The original version of the game dates back to 1983 when it first appeared on American computers courtesy of a company called Micrographic Image, which had spun out of Atari 26-bit publisher Apollo Games before the time the US console market soured. Spelunker was designed by a guy named Tim Martin, a man who believed that life can only be fully appreciated if you experience death as a contrast. Oh no, okay, I made that up. But Martin definitely took his share of virtual lives. You could almost consider Spelunker the original Kaizo game, as it demonstrates the sort of nastiness one finds in tricky Super Mario Maker levels or indie games like I Want to Be the Guy. It offers zero mercy and is loaded with little gotcha traps like unexpected pitfalls or uneven surfaces that bounce the players back into a pit unless you approach them just so. Spelunker isn't particularly a large game. It consists of a single cavern divided by a series of gates. And if you know what you're doing, it only takes 10 micrographic image, which had spun out of Atari 26-bit culture, Apollo Games, before the time the US console market soured. Spelunker was designed by a guy named Tim Martin, a man who believed that Life can only be fully appreciated if you experience death as a contrast. I definitely took his share of virtual lives. You could almost consider Spelunker the original Kaizo game, as it demonstrates the sort of nastiness one finds in tricky Super Mario Maker levels or indie games like I Want to Be the Guy. Offers zero mercy and has loaded little gotcha traps like unexpected pitfalls or uneven surfaces that bounce the players back into a pit unless you approach them just so. Spelunker isn't particularly a large game. It consists of a single cavern divided by a series of gates. If you know what you're doing, it only takes 10 image, which has spun out of the Chinese company culture, Apollo Games. At the time, the US console market soured. Spelunker was designed by a guy named Ken Martin, a man who believed that life can only be fully appreciated if you experience death as a contrast. I definitely took his share of virtual lives. You could almost consider Spelunker the original Kaizo game, as it demonstrates the sort of nastiness one finds in tricky Super Mario Maker levels or indie games like I Want to Be the Guy. Offers zero mercy and has loaded little gotcha traps like unexpected pitfalls or uneven surfaces that bounce the players back into a pit unless you approach them just so. Spelunker isn't particularly a large game. It consists of a single cavern divided by a series of gates. If you know what you're doing, it only takes 10 which has spun out of the Chinese company culture, Apollo Games. At the time, the US console market soured. Spelunker was designed by a guy named Ken Martin, a man who believed that life can only be fully appreciated if you experience death as a contrast. I definitely took his share of virtual lives. Effectively sniping it from its own creators. To sweeten the skill, Nintendo allowed IREM's team to manufacture its own cards with built-in LED lights, and also brought arcade football game 10-Yard Fight to NES for the American launch. Fast forward nearly 2 years later, and IREM finally makes its way to the NES, both under its own steam and with the help of, yes, September 87 saw no less than 3 IREM titles in the US, but the third, Midnight Towers, merits an episode onto its stuff. For now, here's Spelunker and Spoon. Spelunker makes a nice companion piece to the last episode of NES Works. Much like Lode Runner, this is a Western computer game which Japanese release for Famicom took on a life of its own. This outlasted the original Works legacy. These days, Spelunker is probably known best in the West for inspiring Garrett Hughes' Spelunky. For the first 25 years of its life or so, however, Spelunker lived on as a work that blurred the line between cult favorite and mainstream work over in Japan. Released toward the end of 1985 in Japan, Spelunker caught the tail end of the initial Famicom boom and quickly garnered interest for its explosively harsh design. Its release date made it a contemporary of Super Mario Brothers, Challenger, and Atlantis Namazo. Action games with a high degree of difficulty and dense world design. It's one of those games that remains seared into the memories of Japanese game enthusiasts of a certain age. IREM continued to capitalize on its popularity by selling reissues and merchandise right up to the point that IREM gave up on making video games, sold the rights to Tozai Games. IREM didn't create Spelunker originally. The original version of the game dates back to 1983 when it first appeared on American computers courtesy of a company called Micrographic Image, which had spun out of Atari's legacy company publisher, Apollo Games. At the time, the US console market soured. Spelunker was designed by a guy named Ken Martin, a man who believed that life can only be fully appreciated if you experience death as a contrast. I definitely took his share of virtual lives. You could almost consider Spelunker the original Kaizo game, as it demonstrates the sort of nastiness one finds in tricky Super Mario Maker levels or indie games like I Want to Be the Guy. It offers zero mercy and has loaded little gotcha traps like unexpected pitfalls or uneven surfaces that bounce the players back into a pit unless you approach them just so. Spelunker isn't particularly a large game. It consists of a single cavern divided by a series of gates. And if you know what you're doing, it only takes 10 image, which has spun out of Atari's legacy company culture, Apollo Games. At the time, the US console market soured. Spelunker was designed by a guy named Ken Martin, a man who believed that life can only be fully appreciated if you experience death as a contrast. I definitely took his share of virtual lives. You can almost consider Spelunker the original Kaizo game, as it demonstrates the sort of nastiness that one finds in tricky Super Mario Maker levels or indie games like I Want to Be the Guy. Go for some zero mercy and annoying little gotcha traps like unexpected pitfalls or uneven services that bounce the players back into a pit unless you approach them just so. Spelunker isn't particularly a large game. It consists of a single cavern divided by a series of gates. If you know what you're doing, it only takes 10 which has spun out of the highest legacy company publisher, Hello Games, before the time the U.S. console market summer. Spelunker was designed by a guy named life can only be fully appreciated if you experience death as a contrast. I definitely took his share of virtual lives. You can almost consider Spelunker the original Kaizo game, as it demonstrates the sort of nastiness that one finds in tricky Super Mario Maker levels or indie games like I Want to Be the Guy. Go for some zero mercy and annoying little gotcha traps like unexpected pitfalls or uneven services that bounce the players back into a pit unless you approach them just so. Spelunker isn't particularly a large game. It consists of a single cavern divided by a series of gates. If you know what you're doing, it only takes 10 which has spun out of the highest legacy company publisher, Hello Games, before the time the U.S. console market summer. Spelunker was designed by a guy named life can only be fully appreciated if you experience death as a contrast. I definitely took his share of virtual lives. Effectively sniping it from its own creators. To sweeten the deal, Nintendo allowed Irem's team to manufacture its own turrets using built-in LED lights, and also brought our capable game 10-yard fight to NES for the American launch. Fast forward nearly 2 years later, and Irem finally makes its way to the NES, with over its own team under the help of yes, September 87 saw no less than 3 Irem titles in the US, and the third, as it covers, learns much technology itself. For now, here's Spelunker 2. Spelunker makes a nice companion piece to the last episode of NES Works. Much like Low Runner, this is a Western computer game that's critically released for Famicom to on the length of its own. This outlasted the original Works legacy. These days, Spelunker is probably known best in the West for inspiring Garrett Hughes' Spelunky. In the first 25 years of his life or so, however, Spelunker lived on as a work that blurred the line between cult favorite and mainstream work over in Japan. Released toward the end of 1985 in Japan, Spelunker caught the tail end of the initial Famicom boom and quickly garnered interest for its explosively harsh design. Its release date made it a contemporary of Super Mario Bros., Challenger, and Atlantis Namazo. Action games with a high degree of difficulty and dense world design. China's hands are seared in the memories of Japanese game enthusiasts to a certain age. Irem continued to capitalize on its popularity by selling reissues and merchandise. Right after the fact that Irem gave up on making video games, sold the rights to Toys ideas. Irem didn't create Spelunker originally. The original version of the game dates back to 1983 when it first appeared on American computers courtesy of a company called RadioGagagac, which has spun out of the highest legacy company publisher, Hello Games, before the time the U.S. console market summer. Spelunker was designed by a guy named Tom Martin, a man who believed that life can only be fully appreciated if you experience death as a contrast. Martin definitely took his share of virtual lives. You can almost consider Spelunker the original Kaizo game, as it demonstrates the sort of nastiness that one finds in tricky Super Mario Maker levels or indie games like I Want to Be the Guy. Go for some zero mercy and annoying little gotcha traps like unexpected pitfalls or uneven services that bounce the players back into a pit unless you approach them just so. Spelunker isn't particularly a large game. It consists of a single cavern divided by a series of gates. And if you know what you're doing, it only takes 10 which has spun out of the highest legacy company publisher, Hello Games, before the time the U.S. console market summer. Spelunker was designed by a guy named Tom Martin, a man who believed that life can only be fully appreciated if you
experience death as a contrast. You can also consider Spelunker the original Kaisovia, as it demonstrates the sort of nastiness of non-binds and tricky supermarket levels, or any aims like I wanted to die. Notice the zero mercy as living below vacuum traps, like unexpected pitfalls or uneven services that bounce the players back into a pit, unless you approach them with just so. Spelunker is a particularly large gate, because first at a single counter you buy a series of gates. And if you know what you're doing, it takes 10 the U.S. console market summer. Spelunker was designed by a guy named experience death as a contrast. You can also consider Spelunker the original Kaisovia, as it demonstrates the sort of nastiness of non-binds and tricky supermarket levels, or any aims like I wanted to die. Notice the zero mercy as living below vacuum traps, like unexpected pitfalls or uneven services that bounce the players back into a pit, unless you approach them with just so. Spelunker is a particularly large gate, because first at a single counter you buy a series of gates. And if you know what you're doing, it takes 10 the U.S. console market summer. Spelunker was designed by a guy named effectively smiting at its own creators. Sweden was still Nintendo allowed Iron's team to manufacture its own parts using built-in LED lights, and also better capable game 10 years later to NES for the American launch. As for the 2 years later, my room finally used to come to the NES with a really fun team over the LGS. So here were 87 sold in less than 3 Iron titles in the US, and the third, of course, was the LGS. Spelunker 2. Spelunker is the most competitive piece for most of us when it works. Actually, this is a Western computer that was usually provided on the does not last to the original workspace. These days, Spelunker is primarily known as the best for inspiring Garrett Hughes' Spelunky. In the first 25 years of his life, however, Spelunker lived on as a work that blurred the line between fulfilling mainstream work.
12 minutes to complete, with speedruns clocking in at around 7 minutes. What makes this whole thing such a daunting proposition is that Spelunker demands perfect performance from players. Your adventurer has 3 lives in which to complete his journey, and the tiniest error is instantly fatal. You discover this immediately as you descend into the cavern by way of a small elevator. Unless you leap off the elevator to the ground next to it, a requirement that isn't immediately intuitive, you will fall to death in your very first action. Not that falling to your death is hard to do here. The Spelunker himself deals with verticality even worse than Mario did in Donkey Kong. He can't survive a drop from his own height, which is a real shortcoming when you're exploring a cave full of uneven surfaces and ropes and platforms. Your goal in Spelunker is to reach the treasure at the end while collecting all the gold you find along the way. But you need to collect many other items as well. You need both blue and red keys in order to open up the gates to the end. Not unlike the design of Montezuma's Revenge, which shipped the same year as Spelunker. You need to collect flares, which will stun the bats that hover overhead, dropping curtains of deadly guano. There are also glowing icons that recharge your air meter, and pickups that give you random perks. All the while, you have to be mindful of how you leap, climb, and walk, avoiding falls while also evading geysers of steam and other natural hazards. Periodically, a ghost will materialize and hover towards you, and you'll need to pause once it draws near to gun it down. You'll also encounter a few one-time scenarios like a minecart that has to be steered through curtains of flame, and a floating bucket bobbing in an